Mr. Scott Horton.
How's it going?
Mate, thank you for, one, inviting me into your home and
absolutely welcome.
Having a chat with me. And we're going to go out in the boat this morning.
Yes.
But, oh my God, the weather in Texas.
Hey, there's a little blue. No.
It was some of the heaviest rain I've ever seen in my life.
Yeah, good old Texas storm for you. Welcome.
Oh, wild. And well, for those of you who don't know, we just did a podcast before this on your channel.
Right.
So if anyone wants to see that, it was more of you interviewing myself. So if anyone wants to go and watch that, please, there's a link below to Scott's channel. Go and subscribe. Go and have
Scott
a watch.
Horton Show.
Yep.
Easy to find me.
You'll easily find it. And, well, go listen to you on Tucker Carlson on the most recent episode.
Yeah, that was a lot of fun.
You've had some big days. You've had some big weeks. Tucker, Lex, everything. The Lex Friedman, I really say people should go listen to that as well.
Yep, and, you know, I was on a sort of pseudo-working vacation kind of thing there in New Hampshire at Pork Fest, and Al Arabiya, Al Jazeera, and Piers Morgan all sent crews out to interview me about the Iran war out in the wilderness up there. So yeah, it's been pretty crazy lately.
Mate, well, for those of you who don't know, or for those who don't know you, you're the author of, is your most popular book Enough Already or Provoked? Probably Enough Already?
Oh, no, Provoked is bigger.
Taking the number one spot?
Yeah, well, I mean, right now,
yeah,
Enough Already is number one in War and Peace on Amazon.
Yeah.
So bumped Provoked. I think I've probably sold more Provoked overall. But,
yeah, right. So author, speaker, you're at the Libertarian Institute.
Yeah, I'm the director of the Institute, and I'm the editorial director of antiwar.com, which is really the most important project on the internet.
Researcher and Texan.
Texan.
But that's the big part of you, is reflecting a lot of Texas and what I guess it stands for as well. Do you agree with that?
Sure. Yeah, we're all about independence, but it only makes sense that we would respect others' independence as well, you know?
Yeah. Well, how would you describe yourself?
I mean, I'm just a Ron Paul guy, basically, anti-government extremist type, you know? Post-Waco, anti-government, unreformed.
Well, what do you see then as like the biggest threat to the United States? You and I, we spoke a little bit about this, but from, I guess, my perspective.
Yeah.
To the US, what do you see as the biggest threat at the moment?
Washington.
Right. How so?
Absolutely. The world empire. It's murder-suicide. Simple as that. Comes down to it, the dollar eventually will break. People lose faith in the currency, and our guys will have to hitchhike home. It would be better to just give up the empire and retrench and have a free market. You know, the amount of opportunity cost in the empire is just beyond any reason. You know, the real number is 1.7 trillion a year. That's Winslow Wheeler's math. So the official military budget is about $1 trillion. There's another 700 billion for VA costs, the care and feeding of the nukes under the Energy Department, the black budgets for all the CIA and their peers and whatever, and maintaining the world empire, the bases across the world and the rest. $1.7 trillion a year. And then on top of that is whatever bang they are getting for that buck, it's a huge waste to what that wealth would purchase in a real economy. And so it just makes no sense that we would continue when we have a $37 trillion national debt, when we're paying actually more for interest on our national debt per year now than we're paying for at least the official military budget. Over $1 trillion a year just in interest to bondholders for previous debt is just unsustainable. We're at like 100% of GDP on the thing. So, and that's only part of it, of course. You know, we end up militarizing our police, unleashing all of our national security agencies, services against the American people, as we've seen with the leaks pre-Snowden. You know, there were a good handful of whistleblowers or two from the NSA and related, Justice Department people before Edward Snowden. And then when Snowden came out, he showed us how all of the web services and all of the telephone services are spying on us for the national government, as though we were foreign government agents ourselves, the American people. And we're just losing our freedom in every way. And of course, as we talked about on my show, price inflation, monetary inflation, they can only tax so much and they can only borrow so much, and they got to print the rest.
Yeah.
And when they inflate the money supply, first of all, of course, it just drives up prices for everyone and makes the cost of living impossible. Like, you just ask a regular person who doesn't even understand economics. They're like, wouldn't you think that the price of just having a box to live in would decrease over time as we all become more productive? You know, of course, right? But
You believe so.
it's this crazy, inflation of the money supply and devaluing of the currency. But then on top of that, it causes the boom and bust cycle. And I won't do the whole explanation, but essentially the Austrian school are the only people who understand this correctly. That the reason the economy booms and crashes and booms and crashes, it's not the excesses of free market capitalism. It's the excesses of government money creation that makes the economy overall, business overall, believe that there are more resources available for capital investment than there really are. And so they overcommit, and then when the music stops, we have a giant crash, just like happened in '08, just like happened in '99, just like happened in '92 and in '88 and all the way back. It's what happens all the time with the crashes. And so it's just the economic punishment of the American people is, as you put it, when we talk, you said, hey, how about freedom is just like the right to be able to not have the economic rug pulled out from under you all the time and be able to make your choices in a free market, not one that's so skewed. And of course, it's the people who are already rich who get the benefit of all of that free money. They're the ones who get to print it and cash it first. There's something called the Cantillon effects, where us regular schmucks are, when we finally get the newly inflated money, it's finally devalued. But when the people who get it first, as it's coming out of the faucet, they get to buy up property at the current value of money, right?
Yeah.
And we get to pay the piper later. And then, so anyway, it's just destroying our country. And anybody who just looks at a map or a globe could wonder, like, how the middle part of North America thinks that they could be the dominant political and military and economic force throughout the rest of the old world. And never mind all of Latin America too, and how that's supposed to work for the long term. Of course it can't. Like, if we can somehow make the whole world pay taxes to us or something, that we get to be their one world government security force.
Hey, the tariffs are trying.
But they don't. Yeah, they don't. No, that's still Americans paying those taxes, right? So we cannot afford it. We literally cannot be the policemen of the world, and nobody hired us to be.
Yeah.
And the problem is,
well, I think a lot of countries too are like, we didn't hire, but like you were saying, no one hired us to be the policemen of the world. And from an American point of view, you go, we can't afford to be, and we may not want to be. But I think the rest of the world's going, we never asked you to be.
Right.
So a lot of states, because this is what of course we're going to talk about Ukraine, we're going to talk about Iran, we're going to talk about China, is this idea that, do you think that the biggest threat to America is domestic or international? Do you think the biggest threat is Washington, or do you think the biggest threat is, because we're told, at least the media is told, that the biggest threats is Russia, China, Iran?
Sure. Well, look, our imperial government could get us into a thermonuclear war with Russia and China, either of which, or both, could destroy our entire civilization in one day. It's as simple as that. And China has, I think they say, upwards of 600 thermonukes now, up from 300, which, I hate it. People would say, oh, when you deny the agency of all these other people. Well, let's stipulate that all men over the age of 18 are responsible for their actions. Have the Chinese decided to make more H-bombs? Yeah. But America's the world empire, and our State Department supposedly are the smartest weenies in the whole world. They're the masters of the universe, and they know exactly what to do. And so somehow they have failed to prevent China from doing that. I'm not saying they should have threatened them, but I'm just saying they handled China in such a way where China felt like they needed another few hundred nukes. That's somebody's fault other than just Beijing's, when these people are the rulers of the world empire. It's the same kind of thing when you look at the war breaking out in Iran or in Ukraine, or what's happening to the poor Palestinians, that somebody's in charge here. It's the President of the United States and his predecessor and his predecessor and his predecessor. They're the leaders of the West. They're the leaders of the self-appointed international community. They're the enforcers of the UN resolutions and the world law. And so when they just break the law and do nothing but get away with bloody murder and in front of everyone and at everyone's just in the most kind of imperialist fashion, or even just like with no sense behind it at all, where we get nothing out of it at all, like overthrowing the regime in Libya. Like maybe that's what Israel wanted and what Saudi wanted and what Italy or, you know, the French or the British wanted. But how is that in the interests of the West overall, or in the interests of the United States of America, to destroy that nation, break it into three, create a massive refugee crisis and all of that? You know, something that you had mentioned in the episode of my show that we just did was about Europe's massive move to the right and toward nationalism, and probably that's the silver lining in the thing overall in terms of undermining the EU and all that. But it's clearly all directly in reaction to the refugee crisis, which was caused by the wars. I mean, I remember reading reports where they just unironically said, yeah, all these refugees are coming from Afghanistan, Pakistan, and Iraq, and Syria, and Yemen, and Libya. And then they're like, but we don't know what, there's no correlation with that. We have any idea what it could be about any of those countries. And of course, from sub-Saharan Africa, Gaddafi had a strong border patrol that kept immigrants from, or migrants from coming through Libya from the south of there. And so it was a bunch of economic migrants too, all fleeing sub-Saharan Africa through Libya and then to Italy and all that. And so it's just, you know, and the cost of war project says 4 million dead in the terror wars, 37 million people displaced. As Michael Scheuer, who was the former chief of the CIA's bin Laden unit, put it in 2004, he said, America is Osama bin Laden's strategic ally. You know, all the truthers say that Al-Qaeda works for the U.S., which a lot of times they do. But, like, America works for them, too. And we're completing the radicalization of the Islamic world in a way that bin Laden could never have dreamed of through 10 million sermons, right, to get the people to agree with his kind of radicalism. And we go radicalizing population after population in terms of religion and politics and just overall desperation of circumstances. And then move on to the next one. And I was going to say before about, you know, the irony about America being the world empire, and I'm sure, you know, as participants in our empire, you feel a little bit of this too, that like, and I know it's a little different in the circumstances of Australia's settlement and America's, but not that much, but like basically in America, at least in spirit, the idea is that all our ancestors moved here from the old world to just be free, to mind their own business and till their own soil and tend to their community and be left alone. It doesn't really occur to most Americans that Washington is by far, and even though they call it this, but we don't think about it in the proper context, we're number one. We're the global superpower. What does that mean? Just that we're the most powerful country sitting here? No, it means that we are out of area. It means that, as they put it, means that we're attempting to be the dominant force in Eastern Europe, in all the Middle East, in Eastern Asia, as well as, of course, in Africa and Latin America and the rest. Our government is making the whole world our business. And so then Americans are like, I don't want to care about foreign policy. It's like, yeah, but you're kind of doing it. Like, not really, you know, it's not really us, but overall our society in general allows our government to get away with this still. Like somehow we could have stopped it if we all were agreed that we needed to.
That was going to be my question of who's driving this?
Well, it's a giant conspiracy of interests, right? Of course, it's all the politicians want to be tough guys all the time on their shortest time frame. No one wants to be soft on communism or soft on terrorism or soft on Iran or soft on Russia or soft on anything, right? When you're running for office. That's like the dumbest and easiest answer, but it's an important one right there. And then, but you have all the institutional interests of the military branches and all of the spies and all the national security agents and all of their contractors, from the people who go over the intelligence and all that. I mean, there's a whole new era, a whole new military industrial complex just in domestic intelligence, homeland security and all that stuff just in the last 25 years in the terror wars. On top of the military industrial complex we already had. And then of course you have Lockheed and Northrop Grumman and Raytheon and SIAC and all of the Boeing and the big manufacturers have hundreds of billions of dollars per year on the line each. and who finance all the think tanks to keep it all going. Then you have all those eggheads who nobody cares what they think about anything, except arms contractors are willing to pay them $20,000 or $30,000 to write a study about why we need more this or that kind of vehicle or whatever it is that they're selling. And so there's so much of that built in where it's just, and the media, of course, like the price of an ad for dish soap goes up when there's exciting shit going on. Right? Like there's just no doubt about it. That's how it is. And so they're always excited to beat a war drum and get on board for their own thing and just, and most of them, especially the media people, they're idiots. They don't know anything. They don't remember anything. They watch TV. You listen, if you read their tweets, they talk about their favorite TV shows and stuff because when they get home, they turn on TV. They don't read until they go to sleep like the rest of us.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? These are the people in charge of the news. They don't know nothing at all. And so, and then there's the culture of American imperialism where, you know, America's here to redeem the world and make everything okay for them and whatever. Where we're the, in the conception of the Americans, and of course, you know, World War II has a whole lot to do with this, where when you're up against Hitler and Tojo and Mussolini, you know what you do? You knock their block off, man. And that doesn't make you the bad guy. That makes you a big, strong hero. The all-star captain of the team who does the right thing and is a good sport. But when a bad bully needs beaten down, the good man steps up to beat that bully down. And then, but they can never stop replaying that little scene in their head, right? And imagining themselves in that role. Can never see themselves as the belligerent one who others are trying desperately to appease. It doesn't occur to them. They're always Christopher Reeve's Superman, you know, saving the cat from the tree and stopping Lex Luthor from destroying America forever and whatever. So it's, what would we do without them? They can't imagine it. You know what I mean?
Is there an argument to be had that if America didn't do it, then another country will step into that role?
I don't think so, because I don't think anybody else can afford it either. There would definitely be a need for some severe conferences to decide on mutually agreeable arrangements. We have no world state, nor does anyone except the most insane really want one. But then that means that we need to have like treaties and ad hoc relationships and permanent, you know, security partnerships and agreements, especially in the old world where you have these tiny little nation states on these giant continents. They're going to have to figure out something other than fighting all the time. I mean, if America retreated from Europe, and then Britain and France and Germany and Russia just immediately broke out into a giant violent nuclear fight over who gets to be dominant on the continent, then that would be the world's greatest tragedy. You know, we should absolutely find a way to make sure that you guys figure out something for you to go forward without depending on us forever. And I know that there are times, in fact, there's a recent example of this. I don't know exactly what happened, but some band of kooks, maybe backed by the ISI, maybe not, killed some Indians in Kashmir. And the Indians and the Pakistanis started fighting. And then the question was, okay, are we going to have some atom bombs go off? Or are cooler heads going to prevail? Or what's going to happen? And I don't really know what's going to happen, but I guess it makes sense to me. And I think scenes like this have played out in the past as well. I believe Trump, just on the face of it, I guess, until I have real reason to doubt it, that he picked up the phone, or his people picked up the phone, and said, listen, the USA would really like you guys to knock it off. You pipe down, but don't worry, we're going to make sure that they do too, and something. And it was nice to have a mature somebody in the room who's somewhat friends with both sides and doesn't truly favor one more than the other like that much. I mean, Pakistan's friends with China, so we like India more, but not that much more. We still have, you know, some sway there. And I guess we do a coup if the guy in charge doesn't like us in Pakistan, so we get along with them all right. So, you know, now, could the President of the United States do that without a bunch of implicit threats of overwhelming American power or whatever? I don't know. Or could anybody else fill that role instead? Like, for example, the chairman in Beijing or whatever? I don't know. But it just doesn't make sense to me. And I think it never really has made sense for Washington to build a world order that's wholly dependent on the American people being able to afford the structure of this world empire in order to enforce our will. We're just hollowing out our own base, and then who's going to pay for it, right? It just can't hold. So, and then, I'm sorry, because I'm not trying to dodge your question.
No, not at all.
If we leave, is Germany going to then like try to take over the whole continent again? I think the disincentives are incredibly strong there, including the invention of atomic weapons. But even without them, the costs of mechanized war on the continent is not that it stopped Russia and Ukraine from going at it in this case, and with Western Allied help, but I think that war has probably discouraged a lot of people from wanting to get in anything like that on their soil, right?
That war has shown us what modern mechanized air and land war really looks like, and the cost of it.
Yeah.
And realistically, that's still a very limited campaign.
Yeah, and look, our guys had a really hard time fighting just insurgents with homemade landmines and sniper rifles in Iraq and Afghanistan. We weren't up against a state army in either case. I mean, in Iraq, we smashed them in 2 weeks. So there was an army to fight there, but not much of one.
Yeah.
Post-Iraq War I, Iraqi army wasn't much. Nothing like Russia and Ukraine head-to-head, or if NATO went head-to-head with the Russian Federation without nukes, but just in mechanized warfare in Eastern Europe or inside Russia or something like that.
Or just against a manufacturing base like China. Massive population, massive manufacturing base, massive GDP.
Yeah.
It's chaos. There's no winner.
Yeah.
And even this, look at the we talk Second World War.
So,
like realistically, when we look 80 years on, look at the state of different nations and talk about who really won.
Yeah.
Like, did the UK really have victory? Because God, I wouldn't want to live in.
Yeah, they ended
London
up
right now.
Airstrip 1, right? The American colony. And they paid a hell of a price for sure. But so in my book Provoked, I talk about how, and I'm not for this. I think they should have been able to figure out a way to do this without the USA at all. But still just goes to show, in the H.W. Bush years, at the very beginning of the post-Cold War era, and then into Bill Clinton, they both promised these schemes. First, it was the Conference for Security and Cooperation in Europe. It ended up becoming the organization. And under the CSCE, and then later under what was called the Partnership for Peace, which still exists, but it's basically just a halfway house toward NATO.
Gone to shit. It's a good term. Halfway house to NATO. Yeah. Promise of the Russians and.
But they were both explained to the Russians that what we're going to do is we're going to replace NATO as the security organization in Europe. NATO expansion is a moot point. NATO is now going to be a political organization. Essentially think like the EU plus America. And because there are no enemies, so we don't need an alliance. So now what we're going to do is we're going to have a security partnership, and we're all going to be in it together. Everybody between Germany and Vladivostok.
Yeah.
That was what they said, from Vancouver to Vladivostok.
Yeah.
We're all going to be in this security partnership together. And then when there's a problem, we'll just sit down at a table and hash it out. And we'll all be so damn demilitarized that won't be really anything to fight about at all. And then, of course, contrary to those promises, the real plan was, no, America is going to stay the dominant military power in Europe through NATO. And we're going to do that by not just staying, but expanding. And so while they were promising the Soviets and telling each other even, boy, we don't want to move the dividing line east. We just want to erase it and everybody get along. Instead, they were planning on moving the dividing line east. And that was their own words and their own actions as they carried it all out. But it just goes to show, though, and you could argue too late now, and what would it take to bring Russia back, and these and those kinds of questions are obviously huge ones, but it goes to show that without the Soviet communists in Moscow, who gives a shit who's in Moscow? We can deal with whoever it is, and they can have whatever level of influence in their near abroad. I mean, hell, Sergei Lavrov possibly disingenuously is like, look, we don't even want a sphere of influence there. We're cool with you guys having some kind of relationship with these people, an economic relationship and a political relationship of all kinds. We're not saying that our relationship with them precludes it, but not the military alliance, though, not NATO expansion. It's too much. You have to call it back, So certainly up until at least the Maidan, if not 22, there were ways out of this where, we could have figured out a way. Because I think it's just true, right? Like if you said...
And why do you think we didn't figure out a way, though? Like, was there something driving that we didn't want to find a way, that we wanted? Because, like you and I went over that, there was that study by Rand to extend Russia, to weaken Russia. Do you think that was it maliciously moving that forward to, hey, poke, wanting to extend, or we've got our eyes closed walking in the dark?
Oh, well, I mean, Joe Biden was clearly way past his prime, and even when he was 45, he was an absolute nincompoop, right? Like, just know-nothing, know-it-all, blowhard moron. Him and John McCain, couple identical twin, just these are the people who set the policy in so many ways. And so that is a huge part of it. I wouldn't want to call it sleepwalking and all that, because I hate the way it makes it sound like all our wars are an accident, and Washington always talks like that. We're sleepwalking towards disaster. Like, no, you people won't listen to those of us who know better, is what it is. You're wide awake, you get up in the morning and brush your teeth, and then you go do all this stupid stuff, deliberately, no matter who's shouting at you that you shouldn't. That's what they mean by that, usually. But yeah, in a way you can't deny their stupidity. But I think what happens is, time and again, through the decades here, you have people who say, and I mean very powerful people in the government, saying, we really shouldn't do it this way, because we're going to get such reaction from the Russians, and then we're going to have to figure out how to deal with that and whatever. So, I don't know. And then the hawks just do it anyway, and the voices of caution are always disregarded. And so then it's just a self-fulfilling prophecy and a slow motion train wreck all in one big stupid cliche, mixed up there, where it's like, this is what we're going to do. And one of my favorite examples of this is just before the Extending Russia study was done. There's a guy who, I always knew him as a hawk. His name's Ken Pollack. And he was partners with this guy named Michael O'Hanlon back 20 years ago, and they were two of the most important liberal Democrats to lie us into war with Iraq and say we have to do the Iraq war, and yes, George W. Bush is right to do this, and all good center-left Democrat Party, Bill Clinton types should all get on board and support it. The Brookings Institution guys, right? Not neocons, but just center-left damn liberal types, But so, in other words, though, very credentialed and acceptable by those types, right? Bill Clinton types. And they may have even been in the Clinton administration, now that I think about it. I don't know. They would have fit right in back then. Anyway, Pollock comes out with this thing in 2018 where he says, look, man, we need to come up with a brand new security arrangement for Eastern Europe. We need to permanently ensconce Ukrainian neutrality. And he had all kinds of harebrained schemes about war guarantees and other things as well, or security guarantees of some type. But he was saying, we really do need to draw a line at NATO expansion. The open door policy is not the end all in the world. And we really want to prevent a conflict over Ukraine. And we really need to come to this accommodation. And here's how it might work. But of course, it came out in 2018 at the height of total Russiagate hysteria, lies, hoax, nonsense, and the framing of the President of the United States for treason with the Kremlin. So he's in no position whatsoever to negotiate with them on anything. And it severely crippled his ability to even begin to address the crisis in eastern Ukraine, which was ongoing at that time, and much less a permanent new neutral relationship for an American ensconced promised respect for drawing the line and not ever asking Ukraine, Georgia, Belarus to join at this point. We've gone as far as we're going to come, that kind of thing, which is completely reasonable to do. And so it was just completely unheard of and off the table. Like, as far as I know, I'm the only one who ever commented on the thing. Like, I've never seen anyone else even acknowledge that he published this little monograph proposing this thing. And for people less familiar, in the old days, in the bad old days of the Cold War with the communists, we had what was called the Austria model, or the Finland model is the same thing, where it was permanent neutrality between East and West in Europe, where neither of those countries had NATO or Warsaw Pact troops on their soil, or neither were members of either alliance. And they were allowed to be neutral by common agreement on both sides. And so they were saying, this is what they, man, even at one point, Henry Kissinger, I believe, and possibly Brzezinski as well, I'm virtually certain that Kissinger himself, who was always a NATO expander, used the phrase Austria model for Ukraine.
Right.
So we, in other words, again, just all of them know all along just what kind of fire they're playing with if we put Ukraine into a contest with the United States. And, you know, never mind a critic like Pat Buchanan, who of course called this absolutely perfectly in 1999 and things like that, where he's talked about the huge Russian populations in the Baltic states and in Ukraine. And what happens if Russia does decide to move into these countries? Now, our bluff is called. We're either going to go to nuclear war for Donetsk, or our alliance means nothing. So why would we do that? And in fact, look at this current situation. They've been fighting for 3.5 years, and NATO membership or not, we are clearly not willing to do what it takes to secure Ukraine's borders, are we? So why would we ever promise to bring them in the first place when we've demonstrated that we don't mean it? That even if they had the piece of paper signed, that we're still not coming for you. If we were going to come for them in 10 years from now, why wouldn't we come for them 3 years ago? And so we'd be facing the same thermonuclear wasteland apocalyptic threat and be deterred in the same fashion. And so it's just absurd to continue on the way they do. But then the thing is, there's so many interests, and especially, you know, it's the neoconservatives or always the vanguard of the war party. And, you know, I don't know if they were playing chess, if they were thinking long term or not, if they were thinking only in the short term. I tend to think they were thinking very short term at the time. But it's literally Robert Kagan's wife who led the policy in overthrowing the government in 2013-14. And I'm not trying to oversimplify it. Her push was to force the president to hold new elections, but in the meantime, to fire his entire government and hire her hand-picked people to serve in the government, which is a coup anyway. And that then culminated with the Nazis chasing the president right out of town, and then America recognized the new coup d'etat junta immediately as the official government of the country. And this was just, it was not the death knell, but man, it was a major step in provoking conflict with the Russians and essentially making it near impossible for either side to climb down. And however, like if you listen to the famous intercepted phone call of Nuland and Pyatt, what do they say the whole time? We got to glue it. We got to stick it. We got to midwife it. We got to make it sail before Putin can torpedo it. Right? So it's all just confidence. It's just like we're going to invade Iraq and it'll be easy and we'll get what we want. And what's the worst that could happen?
But two questions to this is, why is Ukraine attractive to NATO? And why is NATO attractive to Ukraine? So Ukraine's a very poor, very corrupt state.
Right.
Not very populous.
Yeah.
A lot of resource in the ground.
I mean, the answer is it's not. It's not. Even Joe Biden said 1,000,000 times, we're not bringing Ukraine into NATO. Don't be stupid. That's not what it is. That's like, I'm not calling you that. I'm saying that's Biden talking to Newsweek or Time Magazine. He's like, this is ridiculous. Of course we're not bringing Ukraine into NATO. But that wasn't what was at issue. What was at issue is we have an open door policy that says that any country that wants to join NATO can join NATO if we say so, and no third country can tell us no. And when we say Ukraine can join NATO, we mean aspirationally over the long term someday. But you can't tell us that they can't join. And on that principle, we're willing to spend 500,000 Ukrainian lives or whatever it takes, right? Not American ones. And which, by the way, but there is no door, right? It's just jargon. It's just made up crap that from some meeting in 1999, where they held a meeting, right? They said, this is like in the Clinton government. They said, well, does anyone here think that the Russians should just have a veto power over who's allowed to join? Or what our foreign policy should be? And no one raised their hand, and they go, okay, well, that's it then. Russia has no say in whether we even bring Georgia into our alliance. Even though we might think that, boy, if we really do that, it could lead to thermonuclear war, because we could just imagine what Moscow might think about us going so far, right? But it's a firm principle of freedom and the international order that only we can say no. No one else can. And they were willing to go to war over that, over their right to bring Ukraine into NATO, rather than their willingness to actually do so. And as Biden put it, for exactly the reasons you said, it's one of the most corrupt countries in the world. It's down there like with Sierra Leone or whatever. Like, give me a break. Their economy and their so-called democracy, their political system is absolutely corrupt through and through. In the East and in the West. There's nothing in the center, in the capital there. And nothing to... in fact, you know, I found this very interesting that Paul Manafort, who was briefly Trump's campaign manager in 2016 and was very falsely accused of being Trump's handler for Vladimir Putin, the not even ridiculous shade of a kernel of truth to that was that he had been a political advisor for the more Russian-leaning presidential candidate in 2010, Viktor Yanukovych, the guy who was overthrown in, first of all, prevented from taking power in the Orange Revolution of '04, and then overthrown in the Maidan Revolution of 2014. And they said, aha, see, Manafort is with Yanukovych, and Yanukovych is Putin, and so Manafort is Putin's handler of Trump, which is just completely stupid and wrong. And I should have just interviewed the guy myself. I don't know why I never did, but he did an interview with Patrick Bet-David, the Floridian podcaster guy. And it's a fascinating interview, and it's just, the guy's clearly sincere. Like, he say whatever you want about him, and he was a lobbyist, and he was like a political fixer for corrupt dictators all around the world. Charles Taylor in Liberia, right? Like, he helped get that guy in there, whatever. Like, okay, fine, that's his job. But what was he doing in Ukraine with Yanukovych? He was trying to move him west. The first thing he did when he was sworn in 2010 was go to Brussels, not to Moscow. And that was all Manafort's doing. Manafort was trying to get him to join the EU, and he wanted to. Why did Yanukovych hire Manafort? Because he was trying to move west.
Yeah.
Why? Because, as Manafort explains, the Ukrainian oligarchs in eastern Ukraine, they're treated like the redheaded stepchildren of the Russian oligarchs. And they always get screwed. And they wanted to join the EU because they thought if they join the EU, the Ukrainian regime in Kiev will have to normalize the rules of business in the country to some kind of degree to even have an association agreement with the EU. Because the way it was like, whoever gets elected, they'll just nationalize your corporation and give it to their brother-in-law, right? And they're trying to outlaw this most blatant third world style corruption, which you can't do in the EU. They have more sophisticated forms of corruption in the EU, but not like that. And so that was why these guys wanted Yanukovych, and Yanukovych wanted Manafort to help them to join with the EU. And they clearly wanted to move west. And I document this in the book. I show how Yanukovych, this is a Reuters story, cited 3 sources, and this is from early in November of 13, before he changed his mind, before the riots start and any of that. And Reuters has Yanukovych hollering at his cabinet and telling them, I don't want to hear anything more about it. We're doing the EU thing. Shut the hell up. The debate is closed, right? I'm the boss, not you. Enough. And then a few weeks later, and I already had a George Soros quote, and I'm so mad because this British professor, Halsam, put out a book just like mine right after mine. And it has all this great stuff that I wish I had to poach in there, because he has Kissinger saying the same thing. Kissinger and Soros both blamed the Germans. They blamed Angela Merkel, not Putin. They said Merkel played too hard a hardball with the Ukrainians. They gave Yanukovych an offer. could almost basically, it was impossible for him to accept. It was the barest of loans. It was not even enough to roll over his debt from the year before. And Putin's like, I'll give you $15 billion, starting with 5 right now and at a low interest rate. And just, Putin has just made a much sweeter deal, and the Western side blew it. And these two major, mucky mucks and thought leaders among the national security establishment, Kissinger and Soros, both blame the Germans for ruining the damn deal.
Well, your book provoked, of course. Well, it's provoked a lot of people as well, as you've probably figured out. But it is an unbelievable study of the history behind this. As far as this person, this day, said this, and this is a link to the source, the article. It's a very different layout of book, having the sources right at the bottom of every page, which I really enjoy, because I'm never going to go back into the back of the book and look up 538.
I know, I hate the back of the book thing, man.
Yeah, I'm never going to do it. And I can't read on Kindle, so...
Yeah.
But my biggest question about...
By the way, let me just press these here.
Please.
If you go to scotthorton.org/provoked/notes, then for everything in there that's not a book but is an article, I have the hyperlinks in there. I had to take the links out of the book. It saved me 77 pages in font 8 hyperlink text there.
And saved us a heap of money on the 77 more pages of book too.
Right.
It's already a long enough book, mate.
It's
600-700 pages.
Save 77. But if you go to scotthorton.org/provoked/notes, it's all of the notes, but the URLs are still there. And they're all hot links too. You don't even have to copy paste the thing or whatever. They're all hot links there, all 7,000 citations in there.
So where do you draw the line between, so what you lay out in the book, and I recommend everyone go and read the book, get a copy, go through it. I've underlined and highlighted, I've made a mess of the book, to be honest.
Great.
I was going to bring it with me, but it's that long. My carry-on baggage, I was like, sorry,
I know,
mate.
I was going to sign one for you. I was like, man, I don't want to burden you one. You know what I'll do? I'm going to sign you a copy of Fool's Errand, my Afghanistan book.
I haven't read it,
And then at least you can tow that one around with you
that's
tolerably.
That's more than fine. Where do you draw the line between what is provoked and what is justified? Because I think a lot of people are going, even if we did poke the bear, that we said this, we did this, that is not then just for Russia to then launch a war into Ukraine.
Yeah, I agree with that.
And do this. So this is something I think is misunderstood about you. And I think those that have read the book will know your answer to this.
Right.
But I just want to hear it from you. Do you think that Russia's launch of a war into Ukraine was justified?
No. Or I guess I would have called it that, or I at least would have explained from the beginning of the book that, you're damn right, or whatever. But no, I don't think so. And it's a poor analogy, I guess. I'm just not smart enough to come up with a better one. But I look at it like America put Putin's back to the wall, and he decided not to wait till it was all the way in the corner. And in fact, the situation in eastern Ukraine was just intolerable from essentially anyone's point of view. From a humanitarian point of view, from Kiev's point of view, certainly from Moscow's point of view. And I think look at what happened when the war broke out. He could have invaded in 2014, and he didn't. He gave them some help, but even that help was vastly overstated at that time. I saw all kinds of munitions experts showing that the eastern Ukrainian, so-called rebel army was armed with Ukrainian military equipment because a huge part of the Ukrainian military had just defected to the other side. This was not Soviet equipment or Russian
Vice
equipment.
Was there at the time, wasn't it? Yeah.
Right, and so, and there's a guy from the New York Times, Marine Corps captain, CJ. Oh my God. Jesus Christ.
That doesn't matter.
This asshole from the Times. I know another CJ, and his name is popping up in my head, and it's the wrong CJ. Anyway, oh God, it's on the tip of my tongue. Anyway, that jerk from the Times went, and the Conflict Armaments Research NGO went, and they all said this is all Soviet stuff that had been left with the Ukrainians, and anyway, I'm off on a tangent. Point being, the war in the East could have and should have been solved years before. It had gone on less than a year when, just barely less than a year, when the Minsk II peace deal was signed. And then the Obama government, and then the Trump government, and then the Biden government did not make sure to implement that damn deal, which Obama had rubber stamped and the UN Security Council had rubber stamped and said this is the international law, and then they just did not implement it, and they let the war continue to fester. Of course, they blame the Russian side, but I think that's really not true. I mean, you can see where the intransigence is from Kiev, where they're essentially insisting on reordering the operations in the treaty so that Russia has to withdraw whatever supposed forces they have there out of the country, and even allow Ukrainian forces to take total control over the eastern border. In other words, Kiev has to completely win the war and have boots on the ground everywhere and dominate all of the east, and then they can hold free and fair elections under their supervision instead of Russian supervision, which was not the deal. And Kiev began to insist on that, and that became, of course, the deal killer, that the war has to be over and they have to win first, and then we'll hold elections. We'll let the losing side hold elections under their supervision, which was, of course, never going to happen. So that became the big sticking point there. And in 2019, when Zelensky was elected, he ran on peace and crushed Poroshenko. And the German Foreign Minister Steinmeier said, well, here's what we can do. It's a compromise. It's a new order of operations for implementing the deal, and hopefully one that'll be acceptable to both sides. And Zelensky went to the Russians to try to begin to negotiate the thing. And then they held these giant rallies across the country called the No to Capitulation rallies, which were led by the neo-Nazis. And Dmitry Yarash and Andriy Beletsky, both two of the most powerful Nazi leaders in the country at that time, both threatened to murder him. And they said he'll hang from a tree on the main drag in Kiev. And one threatened to shoot him, the other threatened to hang him. And they held these giant rallies, and as even the New York Times, Andrew Kramer wrote that, hey, these are credible threats, man. This is not like just some kook somewhere makes a threat to the president that's, the Secret Service just wraps them right up. Around here, when these Nazis make these threats, these guys have overthrown the government twice before, and they could potentially do it again, and they got to really take that seriously. Now, at that time, the American Russia expert, Stephen Cohen, did an interview. This would be in 2018 or 19. He did an interview with Aaron Mate, where he said, look, America can help Kiev arrest these men.
Yeah. Right?
You take the leaders of the Nazis, you put them in prison, then you make your peace deal. You don't let some thug prevent the president of Ukraine from sitting down at the table with the Russians and implementing a damn deal that they've already signed years ago. But nobody's listening to that. They did not do that. And you got to blame the CIA and the FBI and the Democrats for framing Trump for treason and the Russiagate hoax for so much of this. If he had just been allowed to be the president of the United States like any other man who gets elected to that position and have his foreign policy, he would have solved all of this. He clearly had the intent to get along with Russia, as we talked about on my show, to lure them away from China as much as possible for our own purposes, for the Cold War. China, fine, but I just want to get along with Russia anyway. So this was, and it's whatever, regardless of that, it's clearly what he was trying to do, and would have had every opportunity to implement Minsk II and do whatever he wanted. When W. Bush very weirdly won Florida by Supreme Court decision in December of 2000, which was unprecedented for any of us, every news lady, you could hear them click their heels. President-elect W. Bush today, blah, 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 blah. We respect him because he's our great leader. He'll be inaugurated any time now. That was it. Supreme Court has ruled. He's the president-elect. That is what it is. With Trump, they pretended that this guy who might as well be the Golden Arches, right, and a Coca-Cola, he's Donald Trump. He's Americana. right?
Oh yeah.
He's like a Colorado license plate or something.
When a foreigner thinks of America, Trump,
Yeah.
he's all of that.
I don't know how many, but I guarantee you that there are double-digit numbers of rappers who have used him in their songs as like the symbol of American success and excess and whatever, the rest. They tried to frame him as some foreign agent, some alien to this system, just because he wasn't a governor or a senator or a vice president.
SVR or FSB. Yeah. You still see it today.
Oh, it's insane.
People ask me every couple of videos or live streams I do. People are always, is Trump an agent of Russia? Is he some leftover KGB? Whatever? And but as you say best, I think actually on the Lex Friedman podcast recently, and the other gentleman agrees with you, I can't remember his name, apologies, is that this absolutely crippled him to do any work with the Russians then at all.
Right.
So he had to come around to then a second term, and now by the time he's in a second term, well, the situation on the ground is vastly different, and we're probably 500,000 men down of Ukrainians and Russians. And
I'm not a big Trump guy. I'm happy to say I rooted for him all 3 times. I hate his enemies at least as much as he does, in almost every way there. So that's all fine. But I'm not like committed to the guy. I could never bring myself to vote for him for numerous reasons. But he clearly was 100% innocent of that, and I don't see any wrinkle in it. I think he absolutely is sincere in wanting to end this war, and he ran on ending it. He says it never would have happened if I'd been in there, which I think is probably true, not just because he would have threatened Putin, but because he would have been reasonable where Joe Biden was not, and would have been able to come to an agreement. And it would have probably never escalated to that point if he'd been allowed to be a president really in his first term on the issue. So, and I think he absolutely is sincere in wanting to end it now, but I think, as we discussed on my show, the position that both sides are in the war are such that the Ukrainians aren't willing to quit the field before they're completely licked, and the Russians aren't done taking the field. Yeah. And so, bad timing, Trump. You just got inaugurated at the wrong time to get a settlement here.
It's sunken cost fallacy.
Yeah, that's it.
They've both sunk so much men, resource, and future into this.
Yeah.
They're not walking away without it.
Yeah.
And if Russia walk away without the 4 oblasts, there's real chance that there'll be internal rebellion from the troops, because there's recent, I think it may have been Wall Street Journal, but they did an interview with some Russian forces, and they're like, well, the amount of cost we've given into this war, we better win some stuff. And then the Ukrainians are the exact same. Zelensky has been very, very clear on anything less than the 91 borders is a failure. And then where does this go? What it does is it attrits until something breaks.
And there's such blowback coming from this. I mean, I was being flippant before when I said, was this on my show or in this interview? I forget about, Nazis love a good stab in the back story. But the thing is, everybody loves a good stab in the back story. And in this case, we got real ass Nazis, and we have a real ass stab in the back. There's just no denying it. There's no bigger pile of promises have ever been made than Joe Biden and his counterparts in Western Europe made to Ukraine. And we're going to help them win this war. Now, they had to have known that that was bullshit. I mean, anyone who's not a liar or idiot or a propagandist or in on this could have told you, as Kamala Harris said, Russia is a bigger country. That, yeah, they are. And ultimately, they are going to win this fight. And ultimately, the only way that America could reverse that would be sending in our Air Force and Navy and Army and Marine Corps to reverse it. And that would lead directly to thermonuclear war and the annihilation of at least northern society off the face of this planet. And so, no. And so everybody knows. Everybody knew. You find me in my speech I gave 2 days after the war started. Or 3 days or 4 days, whatever it was, after the war started, and all the way through, every critic has known all along that, well, that's just nonsense. Every square inch, including Crimea. Oh yeah? With what, a magic spell?
Yeah.
No. That's always been a lie. And yet they pushed it, and they have gotten, I don't know how many hundreds of thousands of people killed and wounded in this thing on the Ukrainian side, as we talked about. Massive emigration of people either fleeing potential conscription or just the violence and disruption and dislocation, deprivation of the war overall. They already were in a massive demographic crisis. I mean, it may be that it only makes sense for Russia to take so much of Ukraine because they're not going to have the population to sustain much more than a rump state anyway by the end of this thing, with all the people who fled and all the people who were killed and the absolute decimation of their economy. And just, God, what quite literally America has put them through by getting them into this. Like, I'm sorry, yes, all the men in Moscow are responsible for every one of their sins, and the men in Kiev too, but who's the world empire here? Who put them in this situation? It was the Democrats who did it to them.
What
dude.
about those that would
it
then
really
say
was.
that the way Russia acts on the world stage is then why Ukraine was seeking NATO and why NATO was seeking to expand?
Well, there's even, I quoted the book, is it Yeltsin or Gorbachev? It's Yeltsin saying to Putin, listen, I could understand why the Poles would resist any future cooperation with Russia. And I forget the exact quote. There was something close to that. And then, but cooperation is in ironic scare quotes, right? Because he's referring to the Warsaw Pact that said, you do what we say or we'll kill you. That was no voluntary treaty alliance. They were occupied, enslaved nations under Soviet communism. And here, Yeltsin's the guy who overthrew the communists, right? He was the president of Russia that overthrew the Soviet Union and finally destroyed it after the failed commie coup in August of '91. And so he's saying, listen, I'm sympathetic to Eastern European states who are worried about Russia. I could feel that, but I'm just saying, geez, you got to think about us too. How do we feel about America encroaching and absorbing all of these countries that used to be our sphere of influence and right up to our border? We feel that same sense of threat now against you.
And why do they feel that threat? Why do you believe that the Russians feel the threat? Because the European, and I'm being devil's advocate here.
Sure.
The European leaders will say again and again and again in chorus that NATO is a defensive-only alliance.
Right.
Now, I push back on that and say, for Eastern Europe, NATO is a defensive alliance. For the Baltic states, for these, it is defensive. But what I say is, well, for America, though, it's a tool of an arm of power. Because if America isn't in NATO, this is where people say Trump will leave, and they want him to leave, and say no, because if he leaves, then he has no influence into Eurasia. None in there at all.
Right.
But NATO is very important. But the role of NATO for America, not only is it 80% of the firepower of NATO, but the role that it plays is far more significant. So what would you push back on if someone says it's a defensive alliance, the Russians have nothing to be scared of?
Yeah. Well, look.
So therefore it's not provoking.
I mean, it's almost comical, right? We're 3 weeks after the final ceremony where Poland, Hungary, and the Czech Republic officially joined NATO in 1999. They launched an aggressive war against Serbia to break off its province of Kosovo in a civil war. They had no authorization from anyone in the world to do so. You know, Bill Clinton was just absolutely in violation of the U.S. Constitution and every treaty we ever signed about whether we're allowed to launch aggressive wars or not. And when he couldn't get a UN resolution because the Russians would have vetoed it, he just went ahead and had a war anyway. A coalition of the willing, Tony Blair called it, before W. Bush ever got to call Iraq War II that. And so that was the first thing they did with it. And then what they went to Afghanistan in the name of Article 5, as though America needed help from our European allies to kill 400 bin Ladenite bandits hiding out in the White Mountains in Nangarhar province. Give me a freaking break. And then what do? They overthrew the Taliban in Kabul, who tried to warn us about the attack and who've been trying to give up bin Laden for years and bore virtually no responsibility, although they could have just slit his own throat themselves a long time ago. But other than that, they bore virtually no direct responsibility for that attack on the United States. And then we used NATO to what? To just expand American power and influence in Central Asia. presumably they thought, hopefully permanently, at the expense of Russia and China, as though American occupation of the Bagram Air Base gives us any strategic advantage over Russia and China anyway, other than keeping them out. Who gives a crap? What, we're going to station nuclear weapons at Bagram? No. Right? This gives us no advantage or some rapid reaction force that's going to fly into an important Chinese city and overthrow its leaders or whatever. No. There's got no real strategic advantage, but they kept trying to think of one, and they used the excuse of Afghanistan to have the Manas Air Base in Kyrgyzstan, which was, you know, right there smack dab between Russia and China, and eventually 30 kilometers away from a Russian base. So, in other words, they're creating a tripwire for conflict in Central Asia with the Afghan war, for conflict with the major powers. Are we getting anything out of that, really, at all? No. And then the war in Libya, where they lied straight to, look, get this, okay? Vladimir Putin steps down from the presidency. Mr. Dictator, Mr. Strongman, Mr. Autocrat demonstrates, as Martyr Mage put it, like, hey, the Russian state apparently can operate without him after all. He goes to be prime minister, but he lets his buddy Medvedev drive. And then what's the first thing that happens? You know, Barack Obama sends Hillary Clinton over there. They said, we want to do a reset and all these things. And then 2 years later, they lie him into war. I mean, not into fighting it, but they lie Medvedev into abstaining on the Security Council when America voted to do the war in Libya. They didn't vote for a war in Libya. They voted for a no-fly zone to protect the poor men, women, and children of the city of Benghazi, even though it was a damned lie that Gaddafi had threatened to kill them all. He absolutely had not, and he had not done massacres of civilians in all the towns he'd retaken already, which was like 10 or 12 or something already. And it's an absolute hoax. But Medvedev, out of like politeness and politique, and was trying to get along with the Americans, abstained and let them pass their resolution. Then what they do? They launched a 9-month regime change war on behalf of Osama bin Laden's men, and absolutely humiliated him, and helped lead to him having to not even run for re-election and step aside and let Putin come back to the presidency as a direct consequence of that, which maybe he was going to do anyway. But there was no way he wasn't going to do that after the humiliation of Libya. So there's 3 major wars out of area. As they said, we must go out of area or we'll go out of business. That was what Senator Dick Lugar said. That was what the Rand Corporation said. That was the slogan. Out of area or out of business. NATO has to find something to do. So they can look right in Putin's eyes and tell him, it's a defensive-only alliance. Yes, we've started 3 wars, before, yeah. And I mean, one of them absolutely in direct violation of the UN Charter in the war in Serbia in 1999. But we'd never do anything to you, though. And I don't know why you would think that, just because we brought the Baltic states into NATO. Now we're bringing in Finland, and we're still working, we promise, on Ukraine and Georgia. Has anyone ever seen a map of Russia? When they say, what are you doing? Like, you've got us surrounded. You're telling me it's a defensive-only alliance, but from here it looks like a threat. Like, how could it not? Right? And the thing is, it does make sense if you were to say, come on, NATO's not going to launch a surprise first strike nuclear attack and invade and conquer Russia. Afghanistan's one thing and Libya's another, but come on, they're not doing that. I agree with that. Okay? But that's kind of not the point. The point is, if you're sitting in Moscow and this defensive alliance that starts wars sometimes keeps getting, completely surrounding your country, you have to take that as a strategic threat. And of course, as I think you already stipulated either in this show or the previous, they have no natural boundaries to protect them. There's no rivers, not a single river or a hill or mountain between Moscow and Minsk, I guess there's forests and swamps in
it's not like an ocean
in Belarus,
yeah.
But yeah, and you can go around that by going through the Baltics or going through Ukraine, which is how Napoleon once and Bismarck and Hitler did it. And so, not Bismarck, where the Kaiser,
yeah.
And so. then yeah. There's a quote from, it was Jack Matlock was the second to last ambassador to the Soviet Union, and he did one of these discussion clubs with Putin. I forget if it was in New York or in Moscow or what. And Matlock asked him, come on, man, you know that America's military economy is so corrupt. All this missile defense, putting these missile defense systems in Romania and Poland and the radars in the Czech Republic, this is just a boondoggle, man. They're just ripping off the American people. We're not really trying to achieve a first strike capability against Russia. You must know that. And Putin says, well, look, like, I like you and you like me. And nobody's trying to achieve a first strike capability against each other, probably, right? I like George Bush. However, like, what am I going to do? This is my job. I'm in charge of security. And if you're ringing my country with anti-missile missiles, I can either do the same or I can just make more missiles. Okay? More offensive ones. So, it's not personal, but it is business. And I'm not going to not do what it takes. So, if you're going to put these interceptors in Poland, I'm going to put offensive missiles in Kaliningrad, and which is exactly what he did. Now targeted at Poland again for the first time since since the Second World War, whatever. Why did we do that? We had no need to do that. In fact, you look at the Mark 41 missile launchers. I'll turn this into a question for you. They put in these missile launchers, and Bush says this is to protect Poland from Iran. And everybody says that's stupid and ridiculous. They're not making nukes, and they don't have missiles that can reach Poland, and there ain't no beef between Iran and Poland, and they're not going to attack Western Europe anyway. Putin says, I think that you guys are trying to achieve a first strike capability, being able to shoot down any retaliatory strike by Russia.
Yep.
And then W. Bush says, Vlad, that's stupid. Give me a break, man. We don't have nearly enough missiles here to shoot down an incoming salvo from Russia. You want to wipe Europe off the map. Everybody knows you can do that. And no amount of few sparrows in our Aegis on shore here is going to take care of that. This is, again, it's for Iran that couldn't hope to fire off more than a few missiles if they were lucky. You know, that's what it's for. And Putin says, well, I still don't believe you. But maybe it's not to be able to shoot down an incoming salvo from us. Maybe it's because the Mk-41 missile launcher is a dual-use launcher that can be used to host Tomahawk cruise missiles that, if you're violating or if you've gone ahead and abrogated the Intermediate Nuclear Forces Treaty, can be tipped with hydrogen bombs. And maybe that's the point of putting these missile launchers in Poland and the Czech Republic.
And there's a secondary issue to these as well, which I can't remember who talks about in one of their books, is about that America could strike Russia, potentially, with something that's medium range, which of course you have far less warning on, where Russia can only retaliate to American mainland with intercontinental. So you have far more. So the ability to strike faster with less warning is there for America. It's
right.
Well, it's at least way more available.
Right.
But for Russia, it's not. So
right.
there's actually far more threat of catastrophic damage towards Russia from this than it is to America.
And see, there was this really big article in Foreign Affairs in 2006 that says, now is the time to achieve a first strike capability against Russia. We can do it. And that, of course, freaked them out and helped to, I think once Bush tore up the ABM treaty in 2001, in December of 2001, I think that started it. But certainly after that article came out in Foreign Affairs in 2006, the Russians were off to the races and made a whole new generation of nuclear weapons in response. So now we're in an arms race with them. It looks like they're winning it. They have all these hypersonics, which apparently our side has not been able to really get yet. Although, I don't know, they say the Iranians have workable hypersonics. It seems like the Americans must have some stuff they're just keeping secret.
Some of our standards are a little bit different on what is considered hypersonic and what's not, given altitudes and etc. basically anything intercontinental, well, ballistic has to go into an orbit. So it gets at the speed.
Coming in from there, it's
speed.
Mach 18 or whatever.
Yes, it's all
coming
about
from space,
relative speed
Right.
of what is what. So some standards in the West of what is hypersonic is different to maybe what we consider of something in orbit. But yes, the
problem is you can't shoot them down.
It's very, very difficult, very, very expensive to shoot down. So yeah, that is the problem. And we even see that, the THAAD system in Israel, like it's $12.8 million a shot or something. America can make, I believe, 70 a year if I'm correct.
Well, and they've got these new heavy, the Americans call them the Satan II, the Sarmat II rocket that can deliver 24 H-bombs from a single rocket.
It's
enough to kill all of Texas in one
multiple
shot.
independent re-entry vehicles.
Yeah. Which, by the way, when W. Bush tore up the ABM treaty in 2001, that also had the effect of killing START II, which the Russians had just ratified. They'd not just signed, but ratified it. America had negotiated and signed it, but I don't even think it had been submitted to the Senate for ratification yet. The Russians had already signed it. It banned all MIRVs. It said one warhead per rocket everywhere, and verifiable terms too, with inspections and the rest. By the way, Colonel McGregor told me that when he first heard of the idea of putting the missile defense systems in Eastern Europe, he said we have to create an inspection regime with the Russians. It's easy. You just put a captain on a bar stool and let him sit there and phone home every day and verify that they haven't started putting Tomahawks in these launchers, man. And why would you not do that if you're not planning on doing it? And then the answer is, I think, just because that would be showing the Russians respect, and we don't play that. You know what I mean? We insisted it's a defensive alliance, and that's just going to have to be good enough for you. We insisted it's shooting down missiles from Poland, and that's just going to have to be good enough for you. And if it's not, then you're just being disingenuous and pretending to not believe us when we say that it's all defensive and that you don't have to worry. And that's just the way they treat them,
What about, I believe, 2004, when there was at least floated the idea of Russia in NATO?
Yeah, I mean, it's come up over and over again. From even Gorbachev brought it up before he was gone.
Putin brought it up with Tucker too.
And Yeltsin brought it up.
Spoken about.
Putin brought it up repeatedly with Clinton and with W. Bush. I don't know if he ever brought it up with Obama or not. But the answer is that the Americans won't share that much power with Russia. They're too big. They got too many H-bombs. They can't be like what Germany is to us. And so look at it this way. They always talk about the lessons of Versailles and how after the First World War, they never blame Woodrow Wilson usually, but because Woodrow Wilson got America into that war, they helped Britain and France turn the tables on the Germans so bad that they were able to dictate this horrible Versailles Treaty, where they stripped the Germans of all their territories and put all the costs of the war on reparations on them and all the rest of this. In these humiliating terms, destroyed the German economy, radicalized the communists and the Nazis and everybody else, helped lead to the Second World War. So what America did after the Second World War was, instead of the British and the French, we were in charge. And we befriended and rebuilt our enemies, Germany and Japan. And they're our pals now. And they love us and we love them. And that's how you do it. And that goes to show that America's a lot better at running the world than the dumb British are. But the thing about that, of course, is that America occupied Western Germany and all of Japan. And we had the Soviet Union to hold over their head. Oh, you'd rather be occupied by Joseph Stalin, huh? And then the answer was no, actually, we prefer to be occupied by the Yanks. Okay, fine. But we just didn't have that advantage when we won the Cold War against the Russians. And the Bush administration and the Clinton administration both said, we better heed the lessons of Versailles. George Bush Sr. said, I didn't go to tap dance on the Berlin Wall and crow about our great victory and beat my chest about that, because I thought, you know what? He was like the captain of the baseball team. Be a good sport, man. We whooped them fair and square. No point in now rubbing their nose in shit, right? We need to heed the lessons of Versailles and be kind to them. But man, we didn't occupy Moscow. And we didn't have the communists to hold over their head as a threat either. And we just didn't have the control that we would have had to have. Washington didn't have the control they would have had to have to then really do right by the Russians, rebuild them, befriend them, whatever, because that would have meant Yeah, integrating them into our military, but really under our control, into our alliance, but in the same way that the Germans are. Now, the French from time to time leave NATO and get pissed off, but they're our oldest allies, and we're friends with them anyway, and it'd be fine. You know what I mean? But like, you know, the Germans and the British stay kind and cooperative, and of course the much smaller European states as well want behind the nuclear umbrella and all that if they can get it. But, you know, I don't know. To me, I think, you know, rather than bringing Russia into NATO and creating a one world white army of the North to what? Use against our enemies in China or Islamic South Asia or something? I don't want that. I say, really, I just want independence. But if I'm a New Yorker or a Washingtonian, then let's do the Partnership for Peace. Let's do what James Baker promised all along. Roll back the military. You know, I mean, NATO could just be a piece of paper, right? NATO doesn't have to be its own giant military command and permanent bureaucracy with all of its own need to expand and all of these things. And we could have essentially a continental security system that includes everyone in a way where the Poles and the Lithuanians feel safe from Russia and the Russians feel safe from the West as well.
Yeah.
It's just a question whether that's what people are trying to achieve or not.
See, it's such a hard one with independence, because when does sovereignty and independence then start encroaching on someone else's sovereignty and independence? And this is, as you know, and this is a great example of that, is if you are an absolutist of sovereign independence, you could say, well, Ukraine, they can be in NATO, they can develop this weapon, they can do whatever they'd like. At what point does that start? What point does then Putin say, well, that's on our independence? And this is that back and forth that is so difficult on this. And this is, I guess, Cuban Missile Crisis is a good example of this, is sovereignty independence, yeah, but then that's encroaching on ours at the moment. Is the main argument from...
It's not exactly sovereignty and independence. It's the sovereign and independent right to give their sovereignty and independence away to a different major power. Right? Which is sort of the same thing, but not exactly, right?
Yeah, this is the argument, I guess, to play devil's advocate from the people that will say, including the British Ministry of Defence, they will say the illegal and unprovoked war. They say it every single day, that what is provoked, I guess, is in the eyes of who's being provoked. From Ukraine, they'll say, we're not provoking anyone, we're being independent.
Yeah. All right, hang on, I'm going to close this window because it's starting to make too much rain noise in here. Yeah, look, it's sort of the same thing with like the war in Syria, where you have people who wish they had a rule of law and some kind of self-government, right? But, oh well, because your country's riddled with foreign terrorist mercenaries. And so what's happening in Syria, whatever local protesters have opinions about whatever don't mean anything.
Yeah.
I mean, what's happening here is the United States and Israel and Turkey and Saudi and Qatar and Russia and Iran and Hezbollah are fighting over Syria. And all these poor people are caught in the middle. And their decisions are, in many cases, like moot, or their motives are moot for what it is that they're trying to do there. It's part of being a small power stuck between major ones. So,
well, I guess that's the point I was trying to get, is how major powers operate separately on the same playing field.
Yeah, like Ukraine couldn't just say, oh, the Russians are building up and threatening us, so we're going to invade Russia now, right? Like they're never in any position to do that. But, well, I think, again, I don't think that the war was justified. I think that the Russians could have found ways to negotiate out of this. You know, if they'd really played hardball and wanted to negotiate, I think they could have. I think they decided that as long as America's continually arming up Ukraine, we might as well go now instead of later when it's going to be harder.
Well, they should have gone in 14. If you're looking military, like just militarily,
walked right in then.
Well, yes, the resistance they faced in 14. That's when they should, militarily was. Yeah. That's when they should have gone. The longer they left it, the worse it was going to become. Yeah. To the point of an impossible Well,
Right.
now it's basically an impossible mission. To gain all of it would be, too costly for the Russians, likely.
Yeah.
And I think Putin, if you were to sit down in a dark room with him, would probably say, should have gone a decade earlier.
Yeah, I think. Well, I don't know. Like on the larger philosophical question, I don't know. Essentially, the Americans knew what was going to happen if we push this thing. It's even in the Rand study, right? They used the phrase, we must carefully calibrate the amount of weapons that we pour in there because we're trying to deter Russia, not provoke them into expanding. And in fact, that was the same word was used by a CIA officer on the eve of war who spoke to Yahoo News. And the CIA officers, they told this guy, Zachary Dorfman is the journalist, and they told him that they had told the bosses back home to tell the White House that you've calibrated it wrong, that we're not putting in enough weapons to deter Russia, but we are putting in enough to provoke them into going ahead and doing it. I'm virtually certain that was their words, right? And again, with the calibration is off. We're trying to make Ukraine too costly for Russia to want to do. But of course, there's a danger that will make them decide to go sooner than later. They knew that was the risk they were running and did it that way. So that's the thing of it, right? This is why they always say unprovoked attack, because if it's just, well, the Russians were coming, so what were we going to do about it? Then that's a whole different discussion. Then America put this small, weak country in this terrible position, and we're using them in a way as a bludgeon against the Russians just because we're so damn mad at them. We think we're going to deliver a strategic defeat onto them by sacrificing the people of this country as kind of a pawn in that larger game. Again, I can't understand how the people in charge in Kiev couldn't understand what role they were playing and how they were being played in this thing and the trouble they've got their people into. They could have just said, fine, take the Donbass, and kept Zaporozhye and Kherson. The Russians didn't annex Zaporozhye and Kherson until after their humiliation in September of 22. And, in Luhansk and Kherson down there with that, as we talked about, the Ukrainians' best day, after which the American military said we ought to negotiate now, not later, right?
Which has proven to be correct
Absolutely.
So far in the war.
And was so obvious at the time was correct too.
Yeah.
I mean, they had already lost all this territory and time was on the bigger guy's side.
And it became more obvious. We had two chances too. So we had that chance, which was when Russia was in a really bad way, and oh my God, I almost said China, and Ukraine just had large success on the battlefield. And then we got a second chance, is when because I can understand at the end of 22 why we didn't negotiate at this point, because we were on the eve, so to speak, of Ukraine's promised counteroffensive.
Right.
That Western weapons are so much better. They will roll across the battlefield, and Western NATO trading is so much better. The Ukrainians will be like the 300 Spartans against these Russian orcs. And that was the promised land. And then in spring 23, within the first few days, we knew, analysts knew, activists didn't know.
The first day.
People will still say it wasn't failed. First day when we saw that image of the Bradleys and the Leopards was getting smashed in that one area, we knew at that point this might not work.
Yep.
And within coming weeks, 8 kilometres got made, about, really, which currently the Russians are making in a day in some fronts. And that should have been our second chance of this is, and I've said, 2023, that was the highest morale of the Ukrainian forces because it was sold, we're coming back. There was the Crimean beach party was being planned. They had the best weapons. Their attrition of forces wasn't that high yet, and they'd all been trained in the West. And when that failed, that should have been to everyone going, this was the best army we're ever going to have during wartime. From here on, it's downhill.
Yep.
And it failed almost immediately, and we didn't take that. And we had two opportunities. Not only we missed 22, we missed 23, and Russia was still recovering all through 23, was still recovering. Mm-hmm. And I think we passed up those opportunities, which will be seen as dire in the coming months or if not years.
Yep, totally agree. And yeah, and that, you know, they telegraphed the offensive, you know, because it was, a lot of it was for Western consumption, you know, for public relations, so that the Americans would see Ukraine as tough enough that they're still in the fight. And of course, the Americans probably believed a lot of their own hype about, once we train these guys up in Germany, this is really going to work. But then what happened was, it was a very mild winter, and the mud never froze solid. So they had to, the winter offensive became the spring offensive, but then it just did nothing but rain for 3 months like it always does. So then the spring offensive became the summer offensive. So they didn't even get to start it till the beginning of June. I was like, yeah, but the Russians have been laying mines this whole time.
And digging.
They knew y'all were coming this whole time.
Surovikin line, they just dug and dug and dug. And
Somebody put Tony
reach.
Blinken in charge, man. I don't know what to say. It's,
What do you think of the idea that
catastrophe.
that we wanted Russia to get extended to weaken them?
Oh yeah, no, I mean,
No, I
Well,
mean
look-
militarily. I'm not meaning extend them politically or decide.
Yeah.
I mean that the states went, because we've even heard.
well, look, I think
Boris-
that was Plan
yeah.
B. I think Plan A clearly was to warn. If we're talking December of 21, right? Plan A is to tell the Russians, you better not do it.
Yeah.
And if you do it, we're going to arm them up, and we're going to cause real trouble for you. You're making a big mistake here, pal. And they did say that quite clearly over and over and over again. Change your mind. Don't do the thing that we know you're planning to do. That was sincere enough, like in its own context. But there never was a plan B to negotiate in good faith and try to prevent the war. And my mistake at the time was, it was not that I thought that Putin wouldn't dare, because I had been warning that he absolutely would dare for years. He had threatened George W. Bush to his face that he would do it in 2007, and or was it in '08 at Munich, no, it was '07 was Munich, and where he said something a lot like that. And then at Bucharest in '08, he threatened W. Bush that, you do this, Ukraine's simply going to fall apart, right? Like, the East belongs to us, the West used to belong to Austria, or, you know, the Europeans, as he put it, and just whatever. This is never going to happen. In 2014, he warned, I could be in Kiev in 2 weeks. He told that to an Italian diplomat. And so I knew that was the danger. What I idiotically thought, which I admit is stupid, was that William Burns, who's the American who understands Putin best, would see Biden through this crisis, would prevent the war. But my idiotic assumption there would be that was his job. But that was not his job. And I don't think Biden ever told him, I need you to do whatever you can to negotiate, or, you know, within reason, to negotiate and prevent this war from breaking out. That was never the job. And in fact, you know, I'm always fighting the last war. I'm always writing a book about the last thing that happened, and I'm always kind of behind on everything. And so I was outsourcing too much of my thinking to others and not reading the Post, the Times, and the Journal. I was actually trying to wrap up my damn audio book of my Middle East Wars book at the time. I was not reading the Post, the Times, and the Journal every day at that time. I did go back eventually and reread the Post, the Times, and the Journal from every day during that time, later on. And oh man, there's so many references to the Rambo 3 days of the 1980s glory and bogging the Soviets down in Afghanistan.
Yeah.
Now, Matt, this is just 3 months after America's final humiliating defeat and withdrawal from Afghanistan. Supposedly clean up, you know something about this, supposedly cleaning up the mess from the last time we did this.
Yep.
And when we helped the Mujahideen give the Soviets their own Vietnam and Afghanistan, we just helped the Mujahideen give us our own Vietnam again in Afghanistan too. And then now these guys are so smart. They go, yeah, this is what we're going to do to the Russians now. We're going to do like we did in Afghanistan. The CIA, I'm pretty sure this is official, the CIA estimate had said Ukraine's military won't last. The state will fall apart and we'll be backing an insurgency.
That whole 3-day thing was not Russian estimates.
Yeah, and
it's American estimates.
Right. And the CIA had, as we talked about, the CIA had backed Nazi mercs in the Carpathian Mountains from the end of World War II through the I think I overstated it previously. I think the war lasted through 53 52 or 54. And I overstay that because I said 59, but it was 59 was when they finally stopped backing the Nazis in Europe, the Ukrainian Nazis in Europe. But the actual stay-behind insurgency, I believe, was over by 52 or 54, whichever it was when Khrushchev moved up. Because he had been Stalin's main henchman in Ukraine. Yeah. So they had experience backing these guys in the Carpathian Mountains, and there's swamps and forests in Volhynia. There's some forest, there's some swampland, and further up in the north there's some forest territory. So they were thinking, yeah, it'll be like the Mujahideen, and we'll bog them down and bleed them to bankruptcy. So then, when the Ukrainian military survived the initial onslaught, then they started crowing about this right away. And I'm not the proudest of my interview with Neil Ferguson. I just hate that guy so much that once we started the debate, I just lost my cool and was not cool. I admit I was not cool. But I did score one great point against him, which was just reading from his own writing from the beginning of the war about how everyone who's anyone in Washington and London knows that the goal here has nothing to do with defending Ukraine at all. This is about hurting Russia by luring them in, bogging them down, bleeding them to bankruptcy, as with Joe Biden in the role of Osama bin Laden. And that's what we're doing here with these people. And it's funny because he kind of tried to deny the import of that, but it seemed pretty relevant to me.
Well, that's the rhetoric versus reality I was going about. We, as the West, have not given Ukraine enough to win or push back. We've only ever given enough, both in diplomatic support or actual military support.
Well, I don't know what we could have given them that would have really helped them win, though.
Well, look, there's stuff
we could give them our Navy.
We could have. We could have done well. I don't know what exactly we could have given them to win, okay? But we sure as hell could have given them a lot more. So we couldn't have. We shouldn't have waited 2 years for Patriot.
Yeah.
The Germans still have not given Taurus. Now, Taurus and Patriot, they're not war winners. War winners is infantry and armour on the ground. That's what wins wars. These just make it more costly for your enemy,
right?
And help your ground units. But my whole point is, I don't know if there's anything we could have given Ukraine to win this war, because at the end of the day, you're dealing with a much larger foe.
Right.
But we sure as hell didn't give everything. And when the Europeans and the Americans will say everything it takes and as long as it takes, I go, well, that's bullshit. Because I know for a fact these weapons haven't arrived until years. Some of the American weapons and British weapons didn't arrive until after the counteroffensive failed, because, in my opinion, they knew that it wouldn't be this Wunderwaffen of which people believed that it was, and they didn't want to see it used in that way. As Challenger 2 tanks, at least allegedly,
the Abrams have proven to be obsolete on the battlefield, right? They bring out a
tanks are
$10 drone and destroy it.
Tanks from T90s through to Abrams have proven to be obsolete unless you have absolute manoeuvrability, and that's why we're seeing far less of them being used. But the Challengers, at least reportedly, they weren't to be used until there's a breakthrough. Don't use that system until there's a breakthrough, and then we'll see it. That's why we didn't see them at all in the front line, because we never saw a breakthrough. And that's where my problem becomes, and it gets into what you say about bogging them down, is it seems so much like the bullshit of what these European, especially the European leadership, will come out with, that Russia is an existential threat to Europe. They'll repeat this daily. It's existential to Europe. Mm-hmm. They're coming to Munich next. Mm-hmm. We're doing everything we can to not do this. And I go, you obviously don't believe that, because you're not going to bring your defence spending up. Right. You're not giving Ukraine an amount of weapons that you could have over years. And if you truly believed that Russia has the military capability to go to Germany right now, I'm sorry, but Ukraine doesn't have a chance. If that was true. And this is where that rhetoric reality reinforces so many's idea that...
But it proves that they know they're lying too.
It proves they know they're lying, because if you were working that this is existential, you would be operating in vastly different... You'd deploy troops. Sure. If you said if Ukraine doesn't win, if you right now said if Ukraine does not win, Germany will be in war, you'd send troops. Yep. You'd send enough that Russia's not going to drop a nuclear weapon, but you'd send enough to reinforce third line.
And look, I mean, honestly, Putin's trying to recreate the Soviet Union or the Russian Empire is the Iraq's nuclear weapons program of this war. It's just a damn lie. They couldn't justify it at all if they said, well, goddamned Barack Obama and his merry men and Robert Kagan's disgusting fat wife, they caused this horrible problem years ago. And so now we need to find and by the way, this heavily ethnic Russian population in the far east of this country that Moscow feels bound to protect and all of the rest of this stuff. If any of that has anything to do with it, if this is a border dispute that we caused, then, in fact, Poland's not in any danger at all, and Germany's not in any danger at all, and we don't have to do any of this. We could have compromised a long time ago over all of this.
Yeah. Do you think
they have to lie about all this stuff? It's the same thing about lying, pretending that Mullah Omar attacked us on 9/11. The same thing pretending that Saddam Hussein was going to help him attack us again.
Who was the gentleman who you're on with Lex Friedman?
Mark Dubowitz. He's an Israeli
right.
Zionim from the Foundation for Defense of Democracies.
He brings up a point at I'd say about 3 hours in, he talks that you tend to have the opinion, at least, and I'm not saying you were incorrect, I just want to know your response in this, that a lot of this is Western caused, that it's always the West and the country acting in reaction to that, and as well as that it is then us lying as well, and more almost belief put onto these enemies of the Western nations. Can you see that a lot would be saying, but NATO moving and expanding was only in reaction to Russia, and at the same time, well, could it be Russia lying about then them not wanting to expand in this too?
Well, as we already discussed, those Eastern European states wanted to join Russia because their experience with the Soviet Union and whatever their history with Tsarist Russia going back over the eons or whatever. The question there is whether it's in America's interest to bring these countries into our military alliance. Because, of course, if Russia ever does try to expand their sphere of influence back to where it used to be, now we have a problem. That was what Pat Buchanan wrote in 1999. They're on their ass now. But once they pick themselves back up, they're no longer the communists anymore, but they're still the Russians. And they go to recreate their sphere of influence in far Eastern Europe. We don't even call Eastern Europe. The Baltics and Ukraine and Belarus is east of Eastern Europe. Eastern Europe ends at Bulgaria at the furthest, And so if we go ahead and bring all these countries into our alliance, and we're simply scheduling a conflict for Russia for the 21st century. We're just guaranteeing that we're going to do this. And I think it's Bill Clinton himself, I'm pretty sure I quote in the book Bill Clinton himself, saying, well, it's really not what Warsaw wants that's relevant here, right? It's what's good for the United States of America. And then on that basis, you might ask, and I forgot who I'm paraphrasing here, but this is all like the men in power themselves saying that, like, how in the world could we think that, Tallinn or Warsaw, or even really Berlin, but what the hell, these Eastern European capitals, that these countries are more important to us than Moscow and Russia? There's just no way in the world that they are. Our relationship with Russia is far more important, and as long as we maintain a good relationship with Russia, that's their best disincentive to go ahead and roll into the Baltics or, wherever their old sphere of influence was. So now by kicking them out of Europe, it's like, well, why not? There's that one, I always forget the name of it. There's that one extremely, virtually entirely Russian city in eastern Estonia that, I don't know, the status quo has held, but if you guys really want to be jerks about it, well, maybe we'll just take our city back, right? We can put them. It's a question of the overall context in which they're making those decisions.
But those Eastern European countries have no appetite, especially after this war, to be part of Russia at all.
Well, good.
Maybe small.
But I don't have any appetite to go to war to keep them from being part of Russia is the problem, right? If they got to rely on Americans to fight for them, what about if the Americans don't want to? And in fact, like you were saying before, even if the Russians did come for Germany, Is America really going to go to thermonuclear war to protect Frankfurt and Munich and Berlin? Because it comes all the way down to it, where, yes, literally this afternoon, we have to lose Washington and New York and Dallas and Houston. And no, like, are we really doing that? Lord, hope that we betray all of our friends and leave them high and dry to all be killed, because why should we have to all die over some stupid idiot promise that was made 80 years ago? You know, it makes no sense whatsoever to maintain this position. And it's clear that, you know, you could say whatever you want about, say whatever you want about Russian ambitions to have things the way they used to be or whatever. But what broke the status quo here was America overthrew the government in Kiev twice in 10 years, started a civil war, and then had an agreement to end it and refused to implement it, and continued to do everything they could to try to take Ukraine away from Russia in like the most vulgar way. If you had asked Kissinger, like, what would be the dumbest way for this thing to play out beginning in 2014 or something, he could have described some idiot process like this, where it comes to a fight over dominance in Ukraine and the most ham-handed American Keystone cops are in charge, and just turn it into this contest where then, now that it is won, and now years into the conflict, the Russians finally say in 2022, 8 years into the thing, they say, fine, whatever, we'll just absorb the Donbass, enough of this. And then people go, oh yeah, see what happened there? The Russians did a thing that they did. Yes, again, they all have agency and they're all over 18, and they all did that in reaction to what the damn Democrats did. That's just the truth, right? It's the same thing as Osama bin Laden. Osama bin Laden had all kinds of beliefs. Whatever. Why did he attack the United States of America? Because of American combat forces stationed in Saudi Arabia to bomb and blockade Iraq, and American support for the Israelis slaughtering Palestinians and Lebanese. That's why. He was provoked. He was over 18. And he had agency, and he used his agency to get revenge over things that Bill Clinton had done with his agency. Literally the agency, and also his agency. So yeah, that's it. America is the world empire. America is the superpower. America is number one. So yeah, we have power and influence. And a lot of times other things that other people do are in reaction to things America did. I don't think there's any question that China's revolutions in military affairs in our era come, one, in direct reaction to American laser-guided technology in Iraq War I and all of the crowing and videos, which, by the way, was 92% dumb bombs, or was it 98% dumb bombs dropped on Iraq in Iraq War I. But the ones on TV were all laser-guided bombs. And so the Chinese said, boy, we better launch a giant military escalation after that. And then was Bill Clinton sailed the 7th Fleet in the Taiwan Strait crisis in 96, 97, when the Chinese were just firing off some missiles. They had no ability to do anything to Taiwan at that time. And Clinton did a big show of force and sailed the 7th Fleet through the Taiwan Strait. And then they launched another new revolution in military affairs, devoted another whatever percent to military development, right? And then Bill Clinton bombed their embassy in Serbia and killed a bunch of people. And then they launched another expansion of their military affairs. Now, guess what? Are the Chi-Coms over 18? Are they grown men who make their own decisions and have agency? Yes. Is it all George Bush's and Bill Clinton's fault that they lived in the world they lived in when they made those decisions they made in direct reaction to American belligerence? Yes. If people don't like that, they can cry. They can go cry to the Chi-Coms. Say, Chi-Coms, help me, because Scott Horton hurt my feelings for blaming Washington, D.C. for the absolute evil, horrible, unforgivable sins that they have committed against the world, and then the crimes that they bring on to us and our supposed allies around the world in response. That's why they call it blowback. It means consequences from things the Americans do.
There's been a shift as well, and I want to know your opinion on this, because I know Jeffrey Sachs talks a lot about this, and so there's a lot of the Russian intelligentsia talking about this as well, about the war has actually shifted in a major way from, firstly, the prevention of NATO and conquering of ground So what I talk about a lot is the Clausewitzian idea that war is politics by other means, and if it wasn't done by normal politics, it'd be done by the barrel. It'd be done by the bullet. If it's not done by the pen, it would be done by the gun. But there's been a shift that I've been reading about a lot, at least in Russia, about it begun as a war against NATO expansion, but it's now ending as a war against modernity, as a war against the way that the liberal states are trying to have almost a woke imperialism across. What do you make of that shift in the war that many, I know Sachs talks about it a bit, there's another Russian author, I can't remember his name, but he talks about that basically, no, this isn't against NATO, this is against modernity in defence of, as he will put it, almost traditionalism.
Oh, silver lining to all this rainbow flag crap. Like, this is what we need, is for the American empire to be discredited and fall. Oh, you hate us for jamming our homo culture down your throat? Great. That's exactly right. Like, that's the best thing about liberal Democrats. They are so damned off-putting, aren't they? Don't you just hate them? Don't you want them to just leave you alone? Yes. Welcome to my world. Right? And that's how, and American conservatives ought to understand how the rest of the world feels when our foreign policy is led with, by this, with these attitudes. You're going to have to reform your culture. You're going to have to, your churches disapprove of our policies that we insist you change? Well, you're just going to have to change your churches then. I mean, how do we expect the people of the world to put up with that? And so, look, I'm for individual rights. Gay people want to get married and stuff like that, whatever. But I am for the United States of America leaving the world the hell alone. We have zero right to dictate any morality to anyone ever on anything. On anything. After killing 5 million people, whatever we're working on now in just this century alone, the hell out of here.
Well, that's what Sergei Lavrov, Russia's foreign minister, said about Ukraine. And he said that if you, I'm paraphrasing here, but he said if you can't sleep at night because of Ukraine, imagine that it was the US and that the people were Muslim and that you'll sleep.
Yeah. And
I'm not saying I agree with that point because I don't have a hierarchy of human suffering or an inequality of compassion to people. I'm compassionate as I am to anyone. But I understand that many, many people in the world massively agree with what he said there. And many people are now looking at, and this is going to be our next topic we move on to, is Israel, Iran, Gaza, is looking across at that and going, the demonisation of what Putin has done, which is an invasion, it is illegal, it is a breach of sovereignty onto Ukraine. People accept that.
Right.
But then people are going, yeah, but why is there outrage about this when there's this bombing here?
Right.
But no outrage against that. And there's been, as far as the numbers which I'm seeing, is there's been far more civcas, children casualties,
it's the worst,
in Gaza in far shorter time than there has been in Ukraine.
By far.
Now, that doesn't mean that, therefore they're doing good things. No, it means it's fucking horrible. But it also shows to most of the world, and this is what you and I spoke about, I think, offline, about the people struggling, one of the biggest concerns I have in the West is people not being able to critically think.
Yeah.
Is you can say both are fucking catastrophic and both are terrible. But a lot of the world look at it and go, I don't want nuance added. I'm not going to add nuance. That is terrible. Because I could say the war in Ukraine is significantly different. Gaza is far more densely populated. It's more in an insurgency fight rather than a conventional warfare sense.
There's civilians everywhere. They can't escape.
Exactly.
Like in Ukraine.
I could make that argument and go, this is why we are seeing less. It's not Putin's morality that has left in this way. It's the way the war is being fought. But that is from someone who's a military analyst. The average person sitting in, say, a country like growing powers, let's talk Indonesia, Brazil, countries that are going to be extremely powerful in your and my lifetime. Countries like that are looking across and going, I don't care, Willie, about the densely population or the weapons used. I don't give a shit, mate. Look at how this is taken as different and the hypocritical attitudes in the West.
Right.
And I think that is very dangerous as well.
Absolutely. And look, the cruelty within which, or, within which with which the Israelis are implementing their policy here is beyond belief, right? I mean, this is a canned hunt. This is fish in a barrel. These people, this isn't the country next door. It's an Indian reservation where the people there are just a captive population. And they're just, burying people alive by the thousands, deliberately sniping babies and toddlers and pregnant women, luring, and this is a huge scandal as it's in Haaretz, but we've known this, there's reporting about this for months going back, luring human beings with starving people who are under blockade for months, luring them in with promises of wheat flour, and then machine gunning them to death and blasting them with artillery and killing them by the hundreds, like rats to cheese, and then slaughtering them, this is what communists or Nazis would do. This is the kind of behavior of the most criminal regimes in our history. This is whatever, Genghis Khan,
the IDF would say in these
barbarianism.
cases, they would say in these cases there's been Hamas fighters present.
I don't care what they say. They're liars and murderers. Their own guys told the Haaretz, I called my officer and I said, you really want me to use artillery on these people? And they said, yeah, do it. So I did it. They're liars and murderers. And they hate the Palestinians. They want to kill every last one of them if they can, or as many of them as necessary, so they can steal all their property. They covet their neighbor's property. So they're committing the unpardonable, unforgivable sin of mass murdering them all so they can steal it. Self-defense has less than nothing to do with it. Be like if they said in America here, oh, everybody knows the Indians broke all the treaties. The poor settlers had no choice but to conquer this entire continent and leave their numbers in the low thousands or whatever it is. Yeah, sure. The Palestinians are the aggressors. They're the people who are from there, who are being conquered and supplanted by European colonists. In no world are they the aggressors, other than when you zoom all the way in and you say on October 7th, civilians were killed by the insurgent fighters. But that doesn't make the war a war of self-defense in any sense, right? That's like, it's more like the Attica prison uprising, right? And then Nelson Rockefeller just sends in the National Guard to just massacre everybody. But they're all entirely under his control, right? This is not a foreign nation. The Zionist lobby in America, especially led by Ben Shapiro, that was, oh, what would we do if Mexico was firing rockets across the border? Well, geez, I guess then we'd be dealing with a political national government in Mexico City and its state army, right? But that's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about a ghetto. We're talking about, the most apt comparison is the Warsaw Ghetto in World War II. And the Palestinians are the Jews. And the Israeli Jews are the National Socialists serving Hitler and Himmler. That's the reality of the situation. The Israelis are the aggressors. They are guilty. The Palestinians are the helpless victims. The Hamas resistance fighters among them sometimes do kill civilians, and in the past have used terrorist attacks like, suicide bombings of buses and pizzerias during the Second Intifada and all that. All that is absolutely unforgivable. They killed innocent civilians on October the 7th. Also unforgivable. And yes, there was a Hannibal directive, but still, Hamas did kill civilians. There's no question about that they did that. And they're absolutely guilty of murder for that. Guilty of, call it war crimes if you want to, for that. But overall, who's occupying who? Who's slaughtering who? And who's committing grand theft of whose property? There's zero question about that.
What do you make then of America's tie in this? Because America...
It's the worst thing about the United States of America.
Would you say that Israel is committing genocide?
Yes. Their purpose clearly is to eradicate Palestinian civilization from the Gaza Strip.
Well, then, as an American, and America being the number one supporter of Israel, is America complicit in this?
Of course. And it's completely illegal. We have the Leahy Law. It's a felony to provide material support to war criminals. It's banned for policy, and it's a crime. It's against not just the Geneva Conventions, which our government has signed and ratified, but federal law implementing it. The war crimes statute is bipartisan laws, passed by signed by Bill Clinton, ratified by Trent Lott's Republican Senate, right? You can't do this stuff, and they do it anyway. And they're absolutely culpable. I mean, America pays something like 70%, probably more, of the cost of it all, provide virtually all the weapons, the planes and the bombs dropped, and plenty of logistics and intelligence support, and then defensive support for any resistance that they face from missiles or from other countries, like when Yemen jumps in or when Iran fires missiles, then America has to come race into Israel's defense. We do everything necessary to protect them from the international institutions. This is the whole, it's the irony, just like with the rainbow flag stuff. It's the irony of serving Israel's interests at the expense of everything else America's trying to do. This whole, UN, the UN Charter was written by Americans. It's Nelson Rockefeller's treaty, right, at the San Francisco conference. That's our world order. That's our international criminal court that we set up mostly to try third world dictators not mess with us, but still. All of this so-called rule of law, the Geneva Conventions, all this was pushed on the world by the United States. This is the at least the facade of the American world empire, is that this is the rule of law. This is all selfless for your benefit. And we're willing to throw it all away. Throw every bit of American so-called soft power away in order to back Israel's merciless persecution of these helpless people. And, again, it almost, it's like one thing between commas on a list of war crimes. They had these people under total blockade for months. They're starving to death. You read antiwar.com every day. Babies are starving to death there. They made up lies like that to justify attacking Iraq in Iraq War I. Oh, they threw the babies out of the incubators. We launched a war over that. Bill Clinton lied that 100,000 Kosovar Albanians had died. It was 3,000. And they were fighting-age males, too, in order to launch the war in Kosovo against Serbia to break off Kosovo. That was the Bill Clinton doctrine. Wherever America can intervene to prevent ethnic cleansing and genocide, we must do it. Look, here's 15 guys laying dead in a ditch. We're told that they were executed. That's enough to launch a war against the Serbs. Where's Bill Clinton calling for bombing Tel Aviv and Jerusalem to protect the poor Palestinians? Right? And how could any of the 8 billion people on this planet ever believe that Bill Clinton was sincere when he said that back then, when he clearly has nothing to say about what's happening now? And same for all of Washington, D.C. that he speaks and kills for. So that's the silver lining in all this. With the woke, with the absolute mass violence and hypocrisy and bankruptcy, and now the absolute moral bankruptcy of the American empire, sunk in the sands of the Gaza Strip. How could anyone believe in American moral authority to intervene anywhere in the world ever again? Whether Americans or especially foreigners. You have your Shah's sons who want our blood to pay their way into power. But show me any people anywhere in the world who want the Yanks to come to set them free. Give me a break. Not that I'm ever saying that was ever the right thing. It was always an excuse. But, I mean, even if you're Polish now, this is really who you want to protect you from the Russians? That's your best idea. Is you're going to trust the USA. There's got to be a stupid Polak joke in there somewhere, right? It can't be right. There's got to be a better way.
Well, this is, as you and I discussed earlier, this is the outcome that Israel-Gaza war has created is, I think, that America has lost 100 years of soft power in 18 months.
Silver lining on a very dark cloud. That's the best thing for us. That's what we need. So the entire world to turn their backs on us and tell us to go to hell. This is the middle part of North America. This isn't Europe. This isn't any part of Eurasia. It's not. So what the hell are we doing there? We shouldn't be there. And we shouldn't be in the Middle East. And we shouldn't be in East Asia either. You know? All the threat from China is what? That they might take Taiwan? Nobody thinks they're coming to South Korea or Japan or even Australia. You're right, they have reason to covet Australia, but you really want to go through the expense of conquering the thing? The profit and loss is so stark on the ledger that they're willing to go for that. I doubt it. You know, I don't think the world needs American hegemony at all. I think any place where you have ongoing frozen conflicts and whatever, these things can and should be negotiated by regional powers. Like even the Ukraine war. America should completely butt out of that and let the Germans and the French, they think they're so smart, let them and the British come to terms with the Russians and figure out how to compromise over Ukraine. And I bet whatever they come to is something that would be a lot more reasonable and would have the potential to last compared to something that the Americans would cook up that would essentially necessitate our continued intervention there, right? Like the peace deals between Jordan and Egypt and Israel, where the American taxpayers on the dime, we got to pay them billions of dollars a year to pretend to not hate the Israelis. They need to negotiate their own treaties on their own reasonable and sustainable basis without our interference there.
But do you think that then we could see, if there wasn't support for someone like Israel, that we could then see a genocide against Israel from its neighbours who obviously hate them?
No, it's their fault their neighbors hate them. They could have made peace this whole time. This is their clean break strategy. Be the world's meanest bully and then everyone will respect you? No. They could have been... Look, World War II was a long time ago. The establishment of the Israeli state is a fait accompli and acceptable to at least the sovereign governments, if not, you know, religious authorities all around the region or whatever for the long term. But they couldn't even listen to their best advice of their own founding prime minister, which was, we should not keep the West Bank and Gaza Strip. It's suicide. We want this territory, but then what are we going to do with all these people who we successfully kicked out of the country we stole from them? Now we're kidnapping them all back again. What the hell are we going to do with them now? Said David Ben-Gurion. And they all ignored him and said, we know what we're doing. So first of all, it's their damn fault for not figuring out how to create a society that can figure out how to get along with their neighbors over the long term. Again, even with these Abraham Accords, that's all American tax money, bribing everybody to get along. That's not sustainable for the long term either. They need to figure that out on their own. But already they stole weapons-grade uranium from the United States. They have an atom bomb program. Apparently they murdered the president who tried to stand in their way. And they have 200 atom bombs. I have that verified from Mordecai Vanunu himself to me on Twitter. That he knows for a fact they have 200 atom bombs. And we know for a fact that they've at least researched making hydrogen bombs, which means that everyone is deterred. No one's going to attack Israel. No one has the ability to wipe Israel off the face of the earth. And if anyone came close, they would absolutely use their atom bombs. Got no morality about that whatsoever. You might have heard of the Samson option, where they threatened to nuke all the European capitals if Europe would allow the Arab states to conquer them, that they would go ahead and nuke Rome and Berlin and London and Paris. That's who the Israelis are. Oh, you're real good friends. You ought to just break your spine bending over backwards to do what they say. Oh, without them, we can't force Jesus to come back and rapture us up to heaven with his magical powers. So we gotta serve Israel that threatens to nuke our capital cities if we don't. While they slaughter babies, while they shoot toddlers in the head on purpose. Not me.
Why is it on a state the size of the US, the largest economy in the world, 350 million people, why is it that Israel has so much power here?
Squeaky wheel gets the grease, man. I mean, so this is the thesis of the book, The Israel Lobby and U.S. Foreign Policy by Walter Mearsheimer. They have an extremely organized lobby. I mean, with great wealth comes great towers full of secretaries and lawyers. And great towers full of secretaries and lawyers, highly organized, can accomplish great things that unorganized masses cannot. And they just have the money. And if you look at any just straight news story about the Israel lobby, they are directly comparable only to the AARP. That's the American Association of Retired People. In other words, pension recipients, right? And the gun lobby, which doesn't really represent gun owners' rights, but it represents the gun manufacturers who mostly want to do business with government forces. So whatever. But anyway, those are known as the most powerful lobbies in America. Old people, guns, and this foreign government of this crappy country that kills little kids all day and has never done anything positive for us ever. Calls itself our greatest ally, does nothing for us. Nothing. But they spend billions of dollars, and they killed the president who apparently, because it was James Jesus Angleton, apparently, who killed Kennedy, and Angleton was an Israeli spy. It wasn't Allen Dulles. It was Angleton. And I don't know all about that. I don't know who killed Kennedy. But anyway, the president who was trying to force them to register as foreign agents got a bullet to the head. And then the president who came after that was sleeping with a Mossad spy and did everything that they wanted, including let not just the American Israel Public Affairs Committee, but every single agency of the Israel lobby in the United States go without registering as foreign agents. They pretend to be American patriots who just can't ever seem to distinguish America's interests from Israel's interests, and just feel that way very strongly when they clearly are connected directly to the Israeli government. AIPAC and its predecessors were all created by the Israeli state and are financed and controlled by the Israeli state. And if a congressman crosses them, they destroy him. I mean, there's probably a couple of dozen congressmen who've come out hard against Israel. And the Israelis, they keep a grudge, man. They're organized. If you don't sign this pledge, just right away, oh, you're going to run for Congress? Here, sign our pro-Israel pledge. If you won't sign it right now, you're done, dude. We're going to give everything that we can to your opponent in the primary. And if you win the primary anyway, we'll see you in the fall. And if you win in the fall, by some miracle, we'll see you in 2 years. And we never forget, and that's it. And that's their policy. That's just how they do it. They play absolute hardball. Any congressman who speaks out against them is destroyed. And then the rest, I don't know, like a lot of it is bribery. A lot of it is absolute idiocy. I don't know how anyone could respect someone who would dare to utter these words. Ted Cruz told Tucker Carlson, "My Sunday school teacher told me I have to do whatever Israel says." When he was 7 and his Sunday school teacher was his friend Jimmy's mom, who's just some idiot lady who doesn't know anything about the will of God in the pages of the Bible. Give me a break. Sunday school teacher. But they believe that. A lot of people believe that. And God, what an idiot lie to believe. I don't know how anyone could respect themselves. It's just insane. And then, if you're really important and they really need you and they can't bribe you, well, they'll just get you laid. And then they'll let you know tomorrow that that 19-year-old was actually 16 and now you're our slave. And if you're a real sick bastard, a governor, a major, university head, a prominent businessman in New York City, a senator, or a congressman of import, then they'll hook you up with a prepubescent child and they'll take a bunch of pictures of it and own you forever. That was Jeffrey Epstein's job, was having American children to compromise important American politicians to serve the interests of a foreign state. And American conservatives hear about that. They go, ooh, that Jeffrey Epstein, that sick pedophile. Ooh, I hate him, those kids. But at least it was for a good cause. That's what Jesus wants. Jesus wants for Americans to bless those who our children to compromise and blackmail our senators to fight their evil wars of extermination and conquest. It says it right there in Genesis. You have to bless Jacob. And somehow that means all this other crap that these sub 100 IQ idiots let other men convince them to believe. Right? It's not like Jesus ever tells anyone this. People are only convinced of this by other people, which is so weak and pathetic, I can hardly stand it. But it is what it is.
So do you believe that Epstein was an agent of Israel?
Absolutely. No question. He worked for this guy, Lex Wexner. His girlfriend was the daughter of Maxwell, what's his name? I'm sorry, his first name escaped me all of a sudden. The guy who fell off the boat and died. Major Mossad, Robert Maxwell, major Mossad officer in England for many years. That was his daughter, was this guy's pimp. You know, the one in charge of recruiting all the little kids for him. And then he's got like one of the most expensive properties in New York City that's given to him by Lex Wexner, which is all wired for video and sound, where they invite all the prominent people up there to get them laid. They asked Bill Gates, so you're friends with Jeffrey Epstein, huh? And he looks right at the camera and goes, for like 45 seconds, dude. It's the most amazing thing in the world. And all these guys, he's palling around with Ehud Olmert, with Prince Andrew. He's got Bill Richardson, the former Secretary of Energy and ambassador to the UN, out at his compound out in New Mexico. He's got this giant ranch. That was what it was all about. American conservatives will hate Epstein and what he did, but not hold it against Israel. Hey, it's all part of God's plan. I don't know what to say. It's completely insane. Israel is the worst thing about the United States of America. They're nothing but a national security threat. They're a threat to our entire system of government. They're a threat to the lives of the denizens of our city skyscrapers. And they're the reason that Mohammed Atta crashed into the North Tower on September 11th. Him and Ramzi Ben al-Shihab. Israel killing Lebanese in Operation Grapes of Wrath in 1996. It was actually Naftali Bennett that called in the artillery strike on a UN shelter full of women and children. And when bin Laden ranted about that in his first declaration of war in 1996, that was when Mohammed Atta said, I'm joining Al-Qaeda and kamikaze and the Americans over support for what Israel's doing, these horrific sins that they commit against innocent men, women, and children. That's it. That's why Americans were all crucified. 3,000 Americans crucified on September 11th for Israel's sins. And for Bill Clinton's sins at Israel's behest. Because Israel, it was the Israelis who demanded that Bill Clinton keep the bases in Saudi Arabia through his entire 2 terms in order to continue to bomb and blockade Iraq. And it was the Israelis who insisted. Yitzhak Rabin insisted, and he gave in.
There seems to be from this war, especially in Gaza, and also some campaigns in Lebanon and also in Iran, there seems to be a very large shift in especially young people and their outlook towards Israel.
Good.
Not as extreme as maybe yours is, but you'll see everything from not only pro-Palestinian protests, which are typically left-wing, but you'll also see a lot of people who are getting pushed, young men especially, into like right-wing, are very anti-Israel. There's that one young lad.
It's a majority of Republicans.
I forgot his name. What do you think the future for Israel might be? Because these people, these are your next leaders. These people who are 20
Let
now.
them suck up to Putin. The Russians can have them. You know, they take all our secret sea-skimming missile blueprints and sell them to the Chinese. Let Xi have them. People say keep your enemies close, but I don't want them.
What do you make of the only, 2 weeks ago, Israel bombing Iran in a campaign that it knew that it couldn't complete without the US? And this was from day one, my critique was this begun a campaign of which physics alone tell you that you cannot complete.
Yep, and we've known that all along, that they couldn't finish the job, that they'd be forcing us into the war.
But not only complete, that if the US doesn't step in, it's going to be dramatically worse. That not only have you backed America into a corner, you've tied their hands. Because you back them into the corner by then launching attacks, but tying their hands by going, not only do we launch attacks, but we've tied your hands because if you don't now come to the aid,
That's right.
it's going to be significantly worse for Israelis.
That was what Mark Dubowitz said after Israel started bombing, but before Trump did. Mark Dubowitz from FDD was on Fox News saying now Trump has to use the 30,000-pound bunker busters on Fordo because now they're sure to break out for a nuke because Israel did this, which he has no problem with. He's perfectly for that. That's his role, is as an Israeli synonym, as an agent of a foreign power in this country, of course unregistered. That's his role.
What makes you believe that he's an agent?
Well, that's what the Foundation for Defense of Democracies is. It was founded to spin for Israel in the first place. That's exactly what it is. So there's no denying that's a scientific fact that he is.
Okay.
I call him a synonym because in the book By Way of Deception by Viktor Ostrovsky, they talk about people who are not necessarily directly in the pay of Israel, or they're not like a compromised, blackmailed spy or anything like that, but just like, hey, buddy, we sure would like you to do us a favor and put your great talents in service of our wonderful state of Israel we all love so much and whatever like that. So it can all be very unofficial, but they're still essentially, it's like Hasbara, right? It's just the Israeli word for an intelligence asset, whether he's directly a Mossad officer or not, right? He clearly works for them.
Well, I guess you could.
So then that's the whole point,
not
dragging
sure
us
him,
into war. Yeah.
But you could work for them without actually realising that also.
Well, that's a separate thing.
What I'm saying is
although he knows what he's doing.
Well, I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know him, but what I'm saying is I see this in the informational space. I see some of these people resharing, say, blatant Russian or pro-Ukrainian, like pro-Russian or pro-Ukrainian information, and I'm going, you actually don't realise that you are currently an agent for their state, that you're getting this information to release. You don't even realise that you're actually an intelligence asset here as well. It's a very interesting bit of that it may actually not be, they may fully believe it as well, not realise that they are an asset in this malicious behaviour.
Well, and of course, that's always the smear too, is that anybody who's explaining the other side of the story at all is the asset of working for that side.
Well, of course, I get that every single day. Sure. I'm in the SBU for Ukraine or in the FSB of Russia. I don't know how I'm in the payroll of both.
Like with the FDD is just Israel's fifth column in the United States, one of many. Right, I mean that's what they're for, and then as he put it, America finished the war for us because we can't do it ourselves. We need you to do it, and then if that means that the program is driven even further underground, and now we need real troops on the ground to effect an actual regime change in Tehran within a year and a half from now, or whatever it is, they don't care about that. They don't care how many Americans die and serve in Israel's interests. We're just essentially livestock to them, useful to them. But otherwise, they don't care about us at all.
What do you think? Do you think that this has given incentive for the Israelis to go from 60% to weaponise 90% to a system? But it needs to be known too that this does take a long time because
and their conversion facility's been destroyed now too. Right?
Nuclear weapons is not just 90% enriched uranium. Right. It's not that. Right. It is that's a part of it, but there is everything from the warhead to the delivery system to the testing, that we know that it was at least months to years away. But now, and
even Netanyahu admitted they were at least a year away when he launched the damn thing.
And I'm almost 30, and I've been hearing my entire life that they're on the eve of having a nuclear weapon.
They've been claiming, the Israelis have been claiming that since before you were born.
But now, do you think that we will? Do you think we'll actually see Iran either gain a nuclear weapon?
I don't know. I'll tell you this. I mean, one major factor, obviously, is unknowable to me now, is the real extent of the destruction at Fordo, Natanz, and Isfahan. At Isfahan is where the conversion facility was, in which they hit with tomahawks and destroyed. And there's at least preliminary analysis from commercial satellite pictures that done by David Albright and his group ISIS. And they seem to show that the conversion facility where you convert uranium ore and refined ore metal to hexafluoride gas and then back again to metal, that's been completely destroyed. So if they have 60% enriched uranium metal sitting somewhere, they can't turn it back into a gas to get it up to 90%. It's just sitting there at 60%. And if they have it sitting there as a gas somewhere, they have no way to turn it back into a metal now. So without that conversion facility, they're pretty stuck. How quickly can they make a new one? And how secretly can they make a new one that's effective and that, you know, in a way that America can't just go right back in there and destroy it? I don't know. How deeply damaged is Fordo? I don't know who Seymour Hersh's sources are. He's usually really good. I know the bad guys always hate him a lot, but I like the guy. And he's put out a couple of reports saying that they knew they couldn't really collapse the ceiling and destroy all the centrifuges at Fordo. They were just trying to collapse all the ventilation shafts and all the access tunnels and all the doorways they possibly could. I know that the Iranians had stuffed a bunch of boulders in the doorway to protect the doors, but you know, apparently this was the Air Force job, was to try to collapse any way in or out of there so that anyone down there is buried alive, and any effort to reopen the thing would take a massive, you know, creation of a new mine shaft in front of everyone, and we could just drop another bomb right down it and not let them do it. So I don't know if that's really true or not, like the extent of the damage there or the extent of the exclusion, right, of whether the Iranians really can't get in and out through any secret passage or anything else or whatever. I just don't know. And same thing for Natanz, the full extent of the destruction. Also know that the Iranians at least claim that they, oh yeah, we already have a secret facility that we've already been building full of centrifuges. And we're just going to restart our program there. And there are at least pictures of trucks all lined up outside of Fordo, where the suspicion, of course, is that they got all their nuclear material out of there before we bombed it. Maybe even got some centrifuges out of there before we bombed it. You know, I don't know what all they put in those trucks. I don't know if anybody does.
But do you think this is given incentive for them to gain a nuclear weapon?
Well, there's no question
one
that it
way or
has.
another.
No. There's no question that it has. I mean, what they had all along was a latent deterrent. So the posture was they knew how to, they had mastered the fuel cycle. They knew how to get weapons grade uranium, but don't make me try it, right? I got a revolver in one pocket and bullets in another. Let's you and me not fist fight, pal, right? That was their stance. It's the same as Germany, Japan, and Brazil right now. They're threshold nuclear weapon states. So it's a big bluff, right? They never said this directly, but clearly the implied message was, if you attack me, I might reconsider God's opinion on whether I should have nukes or not. So don't make me reconsider God's opinion on that and see what the thing and make me make one, right? Of course, the problem with that is, and you might even say, go ahead and be cynical about it, why not? That maybe the Ayatollah would have made nukes all along. And so he knows he can't without us bombing them first. Because just as you just said, you can't just magic wish a nuke. So even if they withdrew from the treaty and kicked the inspectors out of the country and started to make atom bombs, we could launch an aggressive war in plenty of time to prevent them from achieving that capability. So it was only so good of a bluff in the first place, their latent nuclear deterrent, particularly when you're dealing with a president who's already proven he's willing to cross into their airspace and drop bombs on their ass. So that being the case, then sure, they have incentive to now double down. Okay, we told you, we warned you. Not exactly, but not literally, but essentially. We warned you, if you bomb us, we're going to make a nuke now. If they do that, well, the same lesson applies. We could go back in there and keep bombing them and prevent them from building a successful nuclear program anywhere. A conversion facility, even underground. People got to be able to come and go to that thing without getting killed on their way to work. And our side has shown they have virtual air dominance over the entire country, apparently, at this point. They can fly Reaper drones over Iran from now on, kill anybody they want, if that's how they want to do it. And Trump is, I believe, shown the willingness to do it. So now you're the Ayatollah. The Ayatollah's other major bluff was that he had all these mid-range missiles and he could hit American facilities in Kuwait, Qatar, and Bahrain and the rest. Thousands of soldiers, sailors, and airmen at risk in the region. He didn't dare, right? We dropped 14 bombs. He fired 14 missiles at Qatar, but he called in advance and said, warning, I'm firing my slowest missiles at you. Please shoot them all down. But he's got his symbolic strike back. But otherwise, he didn't dare hit back at American forces in the region and bring on the wrath of Trump, who was promising he wanted to keep the thing limited, right? And the Ayatollah didn't dare to call Trump's bluff because he's probably terrified of what Trump would do, and rightfully so. Because American air power, you're right. You can't win a war. You can't. An airplane overhead is not boots on the ground.
but you can destroy a lot of shit, and especially American B-52s and B-2s. B-52s can be just full of dumb bombs. Everybody's all seen the carpet bombing of North Vietnam and seen the amount of destruction that America could wreak with just conventional weapons.
Well, that is, air power can't win a war, but a lack of air power can lose one very quickly.
Sure. And you can do a reprisal and a just, I'm warning you, obey or else I'm going to destroy one of your cities. Like Trump he ordered the evacuation of all of Tehran.
We have Putin.
He's willing to go
with the IRBM. The intermediate range.
The hypersonics.
No, not the hypersonic. What's the other one? He dropped one of them with multiple re-entry vehicles.
Oh, right.
And that was a bit of a warning. We haven't seen any since, but we know it was a serious warning.
Yep.
Yeah. Because I've been saying that. I've been saying.
So in other words, so to get down to it, then the Ayatollah's question now is, well, do I go ahead and fulfill my bluff and race to a bomb now? Or like, has his bluff been called? That actually he really can't. Trump has essentially adopted the Israeli position that for them to have a nuclear program at all is the same as them making nuclear weapons, which is of course not true, but Trump's not willing to discern between those two positions. And he's shown he's willing to fly his planes over there and drop bombs again. I'm not saying this is likely, but it's clearly within the realm of possibility that the Ayatollah is just going to say, well, shit, I guess we just can't have a nuclear program. If we try to have one, they're just going to destroy it. And so I don't know. I mean, they didn't completely destroy Bushehr, right? Bushehr could still run as a heavy water reactor, presumably. I don't know what all damage they did at Bushehr. I think they must have done some.
Well, I think the greater threat,
but they need to have the enriched uranium fuel rods to use to run the facility.
The greater threat is them gaining a nuclear weapon through a third party. This is something that I've said.
Which they could, although I don't know, man.
This is something that I've said for, since this has been going, is countries love plausible deniability. Now, is it completely out of any doubt that in a few years Iran may present a nuclear weapon? Like, there is still a 1% chance that, hey, there is another facility. Like, I know it's very, very low.
No, I agree.
But
they can certainly make one now under a deeper mountain in secret somewhere.
What I've speculated about, though, is imagine that Iran tests a nuclear weapon. And realistically, behind the scenes, that was gained through a third party.
Right.
It would be very hard to point fingers and go, that is definitely a Russian or definitely a Pakistani or definitely a Chinese weapon. Because you go, well, we know you've been telling us for 30 years that they're on the eve of getting this. And now that they've got one, well, I guess it is, I guess maybe they do.
It depends how much time passes between now and then.
Yeah.
Right? Because I wouldn't, I mean, could they get the public to buy that? Maybe. I would not buy that they've had anything going on in secret up until now that we didn't know about. If they break out with a nuke, like brand new within weeks here, particularly if it's some kind of fancy plutonium implosion bomb, then we know they got that from the DPRK or from somebody else.
Yeah.
But, I think the nuclear weapon states, Israel's the only one who ever helped another nuclear weapon state directly develop nuclear weapons in South Africa. Well, I don't know. I guess America probably helped the British and the Israelis to an extent.
Yeah.
And the French helped the Israelis as well. I don't know. But I don't think anybody's ever just handed a nuke to another country yet.
I don't believe so.
Yeah.
But do you think that this, and this is something we spoke about in yours, but I want to speak about this on my channel. Do you think that then we'll see other states, because you and I differ in this, then we'll see other states violate nuclear non-proliferation and gain nuclear weapons? From this?
I'm not sure that.
Do you think this is deterred
I'm not sure that we differ
or
about
incentivized states?
No, well, probably both, right? That again, it depends. If you think the Americans would tolerate you gaining a nuclear weapons capability, or if you think that America would attack you if you try it.
Well, do you think America would attack Australia if Australia said, a country incredibly close to America, has said, look, Trump, we understand that you say that you'll defend Australia, but we are not confident that you will trade Washington for Melbourne or Sydney We're not confident that if China
Yeah.
drop a bomb on Sydney
What
and
would
kill
Trump
a mini
say?
Sydney,
Is that the question? Like, I don't know.
or kills a million Sydneysiders,
Yeah.
that we're not. How confident are we that you will actually defend and retaliate? And we might say we're 99% confident, Mr. President, whoever it is, Trump or whoever. But we want that 1% of deterrence. We want to gain a nuclear system. What do you think America would do if Australia said that?
Probably nothing. Probably help you. I mean, they have a plan right now to put nuclear submarines there, just run by us, but stationed
Paid
there.
for by us, but run by
Yeah.
you guys, basically.
Which also they go, oh yeah, we expect it all to be operational by the end of the 2050s.
Yeah, tracking.
In other words,
I know.
so
I live right next to it. I can see the shed from my house.
they have no plan whatsoever to come up with a peaceful way to coexist with China between now and then. Better than, well, we're definitely going to need more nuclear weapons subs.
I don't know how much. I maybe on some of the Australian Asia Pacific sort of knowledge a little bit more sometimes on military plans, but
Sure.
It is well regarded now that we are relying on the war being mid to late 2030s, and if it's any earlier than that, we're in big strife.
Yeah.
But yeah, my opinion, I see this as being huge incentive for states to gain a nuclear deterrence, because Iran would now be sitting there. I told him, he's sitting there going,
we don't
if I had
disagree
a
about
nuclear
that.
weapon, if I had a nuclear weapon, you
Yeah.
would not have done this.
Sure.
And Zelensky's sitting there going, if I had a nuclear weapon,
Well,
Putin would not have done this.
No, we
and
don't-
Putin's
we don't
sitting there
disagree
going,
about
because
that.
I've got these,
It's
no one's
just-
going to attack me.
It's just that, to me, like, that's the case I've been arguing for 20 years. If you do this, they're going to be more likely to break out toward a nuke. So that's why my long, tortured explanation about, well, it is possible that we set them back so far that now there's really no point in moving forward.
Yeah.
Because they know we just hit them again before that they can get there. That is a realistic possibility. But I think, no, the default obvious answer is that now they're going to find a deeper tunnel under a deeper mountain, and they're going to spin
Not
up
only, but then you're not only talking about Iran too.
It could
But
be
yeah, you've got
anybody,
Iran, okay, and you know, I'm not sure what you think of the regime there, but I think it's a radical regime that is, you know, doesn't respect human rights
No, there's
whatsoever. And
it's a domestic tyranny for sure.
Yeah, domestic tyranny.
And every time
And-
George Bush
and
gives them a city, they take it. You know, like
and a sponsor of, you know, a sponsor of radical terrorists around as well. And that's my opinion on Iran. And more of, I can see that the remainder of the world goes, yeah, we don't want Iran to have nuclear weapons. That even Putin, on Trump's birthday, he spoke with Putin in the morning, and Putin even said, we will help you then dismantle.
they help W. Bush too.
They'll help you dismantle. But what I'm more getting at is, what if another nation who is highly respected around the world goes, well, we want to gain this capability? You've spoken about Brazil being a state on the cusp, specifically for a reason being on the cusp, that they may go now, hey, fuck, okay, we need to do this. We need this deterrence.
Except that they don't have any enemies.
No,
There's
but I'm
certainly no
meaning a state
powerful
like that.
ones,
Like
you
America,
know?
I get America's not going to bomb Australia. But what if Brazil or Indonesia or one of these states is like, this is what we need. We need this deterrence. What if Zelensky right now says the only fucking way for us to guarantee Ukraine's sovereignty in the future, because NATO is not going to absorb us. Well, we can't have Moscow absorb us.
So what are our alternatives? We can either create a one world government with the Russians, where we threaten everyone with H-bombs that they better turn over their H-bombs and A-bombs to us, or we'll nuke them first. And then we have a one world monopoly that'll quickly be a commie, fascist, totalitarian state, and we'll all wish we'd died in a nuclear war instead.
Yep.
Or we have a return to some form of multipolar type system where America retrenches, because we're going to have no choice anyway.
Yeah.
And then hopefully, withdraw slowly and deliberately and in a way, and host conferences in a way, and use our diplomats in a way to try to discourage proliferation where it's unnecessary. Like, for example, China's not threatening Japan right now. Mm-hmm. So Japan could race to a bomb as soon as we leave Okinawa and probably escalate tensions with China. or they could wait around. And we all know, hell, they could probably make a nuke real fast if they really had to. And so, you know what? Like, you guys probably shouldn't make nukes because you really don't need them. It's not just that you're hiding behind America's nuclear umbrella, but you probably don't really have any enemies coming for you.
Yeah.
You know, in the same way we're like, is it possible that Kim would just say, give me Seoul or I'll nuke you if America wasn't there? Like, it's literally possible, but is that within the realm of likelihood? Wouldn't the Chinese disapprove of that? And wouldn't there be like other factors discouraging that other than simply South Korea obtaining their own nuclear weapons capability? And like I said, if South Korea did, then the most likely thing, at least for the shorter medium term, would be more peace. And of course, that would also be a great chip to bargain away. Let's both denuclearize. And, you know, this is a topic that, you know, ever since W. Bush pushed North Korea out of the treaty and basically forced them to make nuclear weapons with his threats in 2002, then the Bush and Obama administration refused to talk to them unless they agreed on denuclearization first. You agree to give up all your nuclear weapons, and then we'll talk to you about any other thing, ending the war, or any kind of sunshine policy, or reunification, or any steps toward it, or anything like that. Donald Trump came in and said, and he had a guy named Stephen Biegun who gave a speech. He goes, you know what? We don't have to put denuclearization first. Let's try to get a peace treaty. Let's try to normalize relations. Let's try to end the permanent Cold War on the peninsula first. Then we can talk about nukes, which is reasonable as compared to the completely unreasonable position of Bush and Obama before that. How could anyone expect North Korea to disarm first and then have talks?
Yeah.
That's made to fail, of course. It's made to continue the status quo. Whereas Trump's guy, and they didn't pursue this because John Bolton was brought to the meeting and completely destroyed it, deliberately destroyed the progress in the talks. And help ruin the thing. But the North Koreans were willing to negotiate on that basis. And now, could we have negotiated them out of every last atom bomb? Probably not. Maybe, depending on what we had to offer them. North Korea needs a lot, and we have everything to give. But could we have talked them down from like, hey, you guys got 36 of those probably by now, huh? Maybe we could get you back down to a even baker's dozen or something like that. You know, like, some kind of progress toward that. And again, if they're willing to negotiate on a permanent peace treaty from the old war, and they're willing to negotiate on you know, economic ties and steps toward reunification, then you're disincentivizing, you know, war in the first place, nuclear or otherwise, and giving the North Koreans a lot less reason to fear the South, a lot less reason to think that they're better off just trying to take what they can from the South at whatever exceptional cost in order to get what they want. So it's the same thing everywhere. Like, you know, I'm not trying to be utopian about it. People are always going to fight, and like the borders, especially in Europe and Africa, are all drawn by these empires in order to divide and conquer populations, in order to artificially group them together to keep them divided and conquered internally, and these kinds of things. So the whole old world is lousy with borders that could be renegotiated. But like, most people don't want to fight about all those things. Most people probably willing to come to an accommodation if people are willing to host a peace conference and figure it out. Like, look, these people really would rather transfer their sovereignty. Look at this going on. People in eastern Washington state want to secede and join Idaho. You know what I mean? Because they don't feel like they're represented from the commies on the coast and whatever.
Yeah. Well,
so,
there's a bit of an idea. I'm not sure how much of you know,
no reason to fight about it,
people will call him an extremist, and I guess he does say some extreme things. But it's good to look at what foundationally he's arguing for of Mr. Dugin from Russia, when he talks about, he believes that in the rise of the multipolar world, that he believes that it will split into more civilizations rather than states with a state of power. So you'll have like a Western civilization, which I guess we have. If we have the Western civilization with the US as the helm of power with the nuclear weapons, and then you'll split into an Asian civilization with China at the helm. And that is where he believes the multiple poles will be drawn, rather than state lines will be similar ideas with trusted states of nuclear weapons.
Yep.
I'm of the opinion that I don't want to see nuclear weapons abolished.
So you could see that, right? And that totally makes sense. That America withdraws from Europe, Britain and France immediately start making promises to Germany and Poland. Don't make nukes. We got your back.
Yeah.
Right? And it would make sense for them to want to do that. And that, of course, the British never want the Germans to be the unquestioned dominant power in Europe. But they're close enough friends with them now, they can politely discourage them from making that move.
Yes.
You know what I mean?
Yes.
And given their own war guarantees. So, you know, it's a hell of a conundrum, man. The atomic age and an anarchic system of nation states, but the alternative that, you know, the sort of, you know, progressive, you know, humanitarian interventionist type soul of a world state is, of course, it brings its own set of problems that could potentially be like insurmountable. You really allow a monopoly on nuclear weapons anywhere, then you might never be able to break that monopoly.
With a global North Korea.
Yeah, exactly.
And that's what you don't want.
Absolutely not.
That a bipolar system, or multipolar, is going to be more fair as a human civilization than a single monopoly. You see how that, because it doesn't end up democratic.
But you know, like,
who runs it?
As we talked about with Ukraine and Russia, even conventional wars are so costly in terms of money and men to do this. And, you know, the Ukraine war should be a major discouragement to nation states everywhere from getting in these kinds of brawls. Look at the expense. There's had to have been a better way from Russia and from Ukraine in the West point of view.
Well, this is one thing which I think is a silver lining to drone warfare, is back in the day, it tended to be that you could have a minor power inflict so much cost on a major power due to the style of warfare, that it was so much shorter range, that it was man on man. And then you came into these industrialized wars where you just have no hope. If you're a smaller country and a large, massive mechanized country comes in, shit, you have to roll over. One of the overall, and I hate drone warfare as an infantryman, trust me, I hate seeing it. But it has given me some hope that you're not going to be able to bully smaller countries as much. With the saturation now of drones on the battlefield, China, let's use a Chinese example, they have had to 10 times any cost on Taiwan overnight because of that.
Right.
And one thing which we may see is a lot of countries thinking twice before the movement onto other nations. And I've said, if we went back to Afghanistan, Australia, we lost 41 guys in Afghanistan. And I've said to my guys, I've said, if we went back there now, drones would be in the air and we'd lose 400. It would be 10 times.
Yeah.
Could be more. And does that give smaller groups more power and more self-determination? That Taiwan may actually now really have a chance to inflict such cost on them. And this is what we've seen in Ukraine, Russia.
Yeah.
I don't think Russia miscalculated given the information at the time. So now it's easy to look back and go, Russia fucked up on the invasion and the push to Kyiv and the push here and got smoked by drones and ATGMs. But what I'd say is, yeah, we know that now, that we know that in hindsight, because we know how effective drones and modern ATGM. We didn't know prior to that date. We didn't actually know. And they were sort of breaking water, and they miscalculated given what we know now, but then we didn't, and other nations would be looking. Say China, imagine if China had plans this year to move on Taiwan. They see what happened in February 22 with Russia and go, fuck, okay, Ukraine's sinking battleships with fucking jet ski part drones in the water and tanks with FPV drones you can buy off Alibaba. Holy shit. And maybe a little bit like the disparity in firearms in America. The whole Second Amendment was, to overthrow a radical government if something comes in. And then I've talked about, and many people in Australia take the piss out of this, from comedians to politicians, go, yeah, but the government is so much more powerful that you out there with your AR is not going to have a chance. And I think you can almost use that similar example to where there was a period of warfare where no smaller state had a chance because it was mechanized maneuver with only some with air power, where now everyone can have power in the air. That does it breed insurgencies being so much more powerful, or does it stop larger nations bullying them? Because as of 3 years ago, and when drones have entered the battlefield, we know any war is going to be 10 times more costly. That we know that if we did now what we did in Iraq or in Afghanistan, we would suffer 10 times the cost.
Well, and by the way, they used
deterrence?
drones to try to kill Putin twice, right? They did one truck bomb or one car bomb, but there was a drone attack on the Kremlin, which was, I don't know if that was really an attempt on his life, but they almost got his helicopter a few weeks ago, right, with drones.
Yeah, I think the one in the Kremlin, I still think could be some level of false flag. Still, I don't know.
Come on.
And the one on the helicopter, I don't know if it was specifically aimed or it was in the air at the same time. I just don't see.
They didn't give us too many details.
I don't see fucking any benefit at all in decapitating Putin. Zero.
Morale boost.
Yeah, morale boost doesn't win war. Like it may be a morale boost for a week, and then you know what's going to happen? The reality of the battlefield comes back to haunt you. Yeah. That is the thing.
And worse, probably and make them mad.
Well, who do you get? We don't probably Medvedev.
Right.
We know what he's like. We believe we know what he's like. And you take out a leader, Jesus Christ, you know. And this was, I think you talk about it in Provoked, the idea of like a one man, that it's not Putin is a crazy dictator and the rest of the country don't agree with him. And if he was taken out, then the war would end.
Right.
The war doesn't work like that. It's not. It would still continue. Someone else would be in, because a lot of Russians. People have this idea that everyone in Russia hates Putin and that the election would. And I'll say this: I don't believe for a second that the Russian election is democratic. But I also think if it was democratic, he'd probably fucking win.
Yeah.
And
hell, he would have won in Ukraine, according to the polls in 2010.
Right.
If he'd been allowed to run for president, he would have beat Yanukovych.
And that's one of the things is a decapitation strike like that is not going to work, and especially with Trump in power, and we know how transactional Trump is.
Yeah.
That if Ukraine took out Putin, and honestly, if Russia dropped a fucking massive bomb somewhere, there would be probably no American escalation from that. And I don't believe. I don't think Ukraine makes many steps without America's permission.
Yeah.
But
though, I mean, the point we were on though was how these drones change the calculation in the minds of the leaders, right? Because if a drone can reach out and touch the leaders, it's almost like talking about the danger of nukes. Like it's easy to have conventional wars far away, but when your own capital city's at risk, then where are you going to go?
Exactly.
Same now. Now we're not talking about an A-bomb. Now we're talking about a little bitty bomb that can fly in your car window. Yeah. Right?
And has that fundamentally changed the way that states act to large and small states? I guess we'll see. We'll see in the future. I hope that drones actually are so efficient that more countries walk away from war. And that's my same opinion. I know you may disagree on this. It's my same opinion with nuclear weapons. Is they're so devastating, they're so efficient, they're so unstoppable that it deters anyone from making.
Oh, I don't disagree with that. I think even the greatest peacenik, anti-nuclear weapon socialist nun with a hammer would agree that they are a great deterrent. It's just when the bet fails. The way I look at it with nukes is, okay, we have this Mexican standoff. We're all holding H-bombs to each other's head.
Yeah.
And then, now how long are we going to stand here like this? This is going to last for 50 years, for 75 years, for the next 100 years, for the next 200 years. This is our permanent national security posture on the planet, is every powerful state holding hydrogen bombs over each other's capital city's head. That's not going to last. We're all going to die. There's got to be a better way. And I don't know what the hell it is. Reagan and Gorbachev came within a hair of agreeing at Reykjavik to abolish all nukes. And they wanted to get, and it wasn't a utopian thing, they wanted to get us down to essentially parity with England and France and Israel and China at about 200 or 300. And then from there, we'd work on peer pressure in everybody. Let's see if we can get down to 100. Let's see if we can get down to 50. Let's see if we can get down to 10. The worst case scenario, we go to war. Let's still not kill all of humanity. Keep enough of a deterrent that nobody wants to lose their capital city.
Is their argument,
and
though,
leave it at that,
that a limited nuclear warfare is going to be less costly than a unlimited conventional war. That if China and America step into a conventional war in the world, that is going to be more deadly and longer than if one country fires a bomb and the other one goes, fuck, we can't do this.
Maybe, but that's...
I know you're rolling, you're rolling high pressure
dice.
dice.
The posture of escalate to de-escalate doesn't, nobody agrees that will work on them. If you escalate to de-escalate with me, pal, I'm going to escalate back. And then the other side says that too. So I think if anybody starts throwing nukes, the other side doesn't say, hey, I don't want any of this. The other side throws nukes back, and that's it. And that's virtually all the war games. I've read quite a bit about this, where, especially like all through the 80s and 90s, they did these war games where every time a nuclear war starts, it ends up escalating to full-scale, regional, global catastrophe. Nobody's willing to hold their weapons in reserve. You use them or lose them. They're nuking us. We're not going to let them get away with that. There's, they wrote this down. Like in the event of, and this was changed, presumably in the Kennedy years, but in the Eisenhower years, the deal was if there's a fight over West Berlin, we nuke every city in the Soviet Union and China. Right? And so not just in Russia, but in the entire USSR and China. Why China? Because if we're all going to die and kill all the Soviets in a nuclear war, well, we'll be damned if we're just going to leave the world to the Chinese to take over then after that. So we have to kill all them too. It was completely insane. I mean, you could say it kept the peace. It did. But it's, what do you say? Low probability, high consequence event if these things start getting
it's high risk.
Yeah.
So to finish up...
And if you can imagine like a H-bomb actually going off over your city at high tens of kilotons, what that means, right? That's the death, that's like the Nakba in an instant, right? The death of, and not the cleansing, but the death of 750,000 people in the blink of an eye.
I don't think people actually have a understanding of the scale of these weapons now.
Right.
That they think about.
It's useful to do a chart where they show, here's the Hiroshima bomb,
yes, that's exactly
here's the Nagasaki bomb, here's a hydrogen bomb, Ivy Mike, right? And here's Tsar Bomba, 50 megatons. Yeah. And you go, this is Hiroshima and this is our, okay. I see why we should not be setting these off.
Devastating cities. Your whole city's gone.
Living things, yeah.
One
Trident submarine can hold 200 and something, I forgot the exact number, 250 something. Warheads. That's enough to kill all of Russia with just one sub.
Yeah. And the Russians are cruising around submarines like that. Chinese will be at some point, if not already. It is a very scary thing that will either, likely be the end. But I don't see. I understand your idea that we should abolish this, but I just don't see how anyone is ever going to agree to that, because then if you become the country with them...
Well, one thing about it is, especially for the major powers, is we could go back to making them quick, right? The secret can't be undone, right? It's 1940s technology to split some of these metals, atoms, you know what I mean? You do what you can. So it would be, that would always be there, that we can rearm if the treaty fails, but let's try to do the treaty and let's try to enforce it and let's try to find reasons to get along and keep everybody within it. And this goes to, people always say it was just so utopian that if we do business with China, it'll end up becoming a free country and such a good friend of ours that we don't mind making them rich and all that. And that hasn't worked out perfectly. It's made them wealthy enough to be independent from us. But of course, what do we think? That they're just going to totally just line up to, like Japan. Again, we got troops in Japan still, right? China was never going to be that, but what, we prefer they were all starving to death under Marxism by the tens of millions? Or no, we're happy that they're doing better, and the more integrated our economy is with theirs, with everybody else in the world, the less likely we are to fight, or at least the more disincentive we have to fight. This is what Frederick Bastiat actually never said, that where goods do not cross borders, soldiers will. But he should have said that because it's smart. And so then the point is drop your barriers, open up trade, and let's not fight, because we're too economically interdependent on each other's success to want to go to the mat over any old conflict, right? So, I mean, even with India and Kashmir, like India and Pakistan, let's get them trading as much as we possibly can, so that when it comes to some LET terrorists kill some tourists in India, cooler heads prevail instead of hotter ones, because there's just too much at stake. This is what helped when the Chinese shot down or crashed into, I guess, and downed the American spy plane in the spring of 2001. Wall Street got on the phone to Colin Powell, and Colin Powell got on the phone to the Chinese and said, let's work this out, guys. We don't want to heighten tensions here, man. We're real sorry about flying that spy plane so close to your country. And we're sure that you're very sorry about your fighter actually accidentally crashing into it and forcing it down and stealing all the computers out of it. But if you just give us our plane and our men back, please. And then he could have started hollering and pounding on the table and making threats, and they could have escalated in response. But instead, the idea was, Wall Street has $100 bazillion invested in China right now.
Yeah.
And they don't want to lose all that money that they put in there. So let's keep it cool. I mean, that's how to keep Indonesia and Brazil and Australia and China and everybody from killing each other, hopefully, is. And this is where I know, economic nationalism is very popular now, because the war economy has been so devastating for the United States. But like, the costs of having these wars break out are incalculable. So if we can encourage the Russians to open a natural gas pipeline to Germany, and that costs Texas natural gas exporters a little bit in the short term, who cares? Because what's most important is that Germany and Russia don't bite, because the last 2 times they did, it was the worst thing that ever happened. Yeah. So let's not do that, and then we'll figure out other stuff. And it's a world. It's so hard for me to understand anyone else not getting it. Go back to the end of the Cold War, and what if we just didn't do the empire? And we just hadn't wasted any of this money on militarism, and we really had just emphasized free market economics and free trade between nations, and had just had prosperity, none of the waste of the Middle East wars or any of this stuff this whole time in building the empire. We would have had so much more prosperity, and all the nations' economies would be so much more interdependent. That, again, I'm absolutely opposed. I'm like a former, I was never like an actual member of the John Birch Society, but like, I love those guys, and I still have my no UN pin in the glove box of my truck for the last 30 years there that I got from those guys. Like, I want no world government, but I don't think you have to integrate the nations of the world into a single state in order to have an integrated economy. And that doesn't mean that we should offshore all manufacturing to China and then have none, or any of those kinds of things. Those are governmental policies that make those choices. We don't need to do that. We just need to allow there to be free markets. And I think that's essentially how to come as close as possible to world peace, is integrate mankind economically with each other, where it turns out, China and the United States are just fictions on paper, and what we have are a bunch of humans who want and need to trade with each other and keep each other full of goods and services and whatever they need, right? So whatever their wants are. And so if there's a future of mankind, that's it. It's got to be freedom and free trade and open business relationships. If we're going to carve the world, like you're saying, like the Dugan idea, where, okay, it's going to be Asiatic civilization versus Eurasian civilization versus Africans versus Arabs or whatever, then or Hispanic civilization in Latin America and all that, then we're going to all end up fighting. In fact, there's a great, really great book called Wilson's War by a guy named James Powell, about how everything wrong in the world is his fault for getting us into World War I. But he says in the prologue that before World War I, before they were the Allied powers and the Central powers, they were 2 competing trade blocs. And they had free trade within each other's blocs. And then those were the 2 blocs that became the military alliances that went to war. What they should have done was joined into one big trade bloc.
Yeah.
That was what they were fighting about, was who owns that coal and who's going to be able to use it to fuel their furnaces. And so what they could have and should have done was recognize that, geez, we don't have beef with each other. So what we need to do is drop these barriers and drop the competition as major blocks and just integrate all our economies together and keep the thing going.
Do you have a positive outlook for the future?
That's it. That's the best I can do.
But
freedom works if we can try it.
Yes, but do you believe that that is realistic? Do you think that the powers that be, Xi, Trump, Putin, their predecessors,
yes,
do you think that the world in 10 years is going to be better or worse than it is?
Well, I don't know. I mean, that depends on a lot of things. Overall, I think I agree with Murray Rothbard's prescription of short-term pessimism, but long-term optimism. You know, we can all count all of the horrible things going on and all the disincentives to prosperity and peace and freedom that we have in the world. But overall, peace and freedom and prosperity is what everybody wants, other than the few in power determined to make it the other way. But otherwise, the pursuit of happiness is the purpose of existence. And so how to have happiness is to have markets, is to have free prices. You try to set them, you're going to cause shortages, right? Like you need liberty to have prosperity.
And then if a state doesn't want to have it, but then if a state, say we all agree, say that Russia and America, and India, and the rest of the West and Africa and whatever, that we all go, this is what we want to pursue. And then China go, we don't want to pursue that. What then do we do?
Well,
does that then give us the right to go, well, one of you's fucking it for all of us and we're going to take this out?
Well, it would depend on the particular circumstance. I mean, in the actual history of China, what happened was they had adopted Marxist economics under the most insane dictator who ever lived, Mao Zedong, and his idiotic Gang of Four and the rest of what they did. And then he finally died, and Chou En-lai and Deng Xiaoping came and led the right wing of the Communist Party to essentially destroy Marxism. I mean, they still have a red flag and single party state, but they turned hard to the right because prices work. And it's still very much a crony economy like America's is, but I think it's very unlikely they're going to turn back to communism after they went from caveman status to first world status.
I don't mean, I use China just as an example, but if one state says, you know, we're a great state, a nuclear state, says you guys can do that, but we're not.
Well, they're going to do what instead? Just conquer their next door neighbors?
They just want to be walls up, individual, continue on their path. What then do we do? Do we have a right to influence?
Oh, yeah. No, I don't care about that. No. I mean, and this is the difference between a libertarian and a liberal, right? Liberals have made their peace with capitalism. They're not socialists, right? But they don't really understand capitalism or have like a real principle of liberty. They just are, like center-left Clinton Democrats who've been bribed by big businesses to go along with what they want. So that's what makes them imperialists. Libertarians are not imperialists. Libertarians would shame any country for adopting Marxism, but especially with the Soviet Union gone and the old Cold War over, then no libertarian says, for example, that we ought to be intervening in Cuba or intervening in Venezuela or whatever to make those people adopt our economics. In fact, the horrible thing is that, for one example, we have these absolutely horrific, or two examples, we have horrific sanctions against both of those countries, where, you know, they're already as, you know, desperate as their lousy economics are going to make them, and then we make it even worse. And then, you know, you hear especially right-wingers right now railing against Venezuelan gangs in the United States. Well, why did they flee Venezuela? One, communism doesn't work too well, although they're not full communists, but like their socialism is very bad. But also America made it a crime for any global corporation to do business with Venezuela.
Yeah.
So you can't have just some French oil company come in there and develop their oil resources for them. You had to have, there was an Iranian company came and opened some grocery stores in Venezuela because no one else will do business with them because America's made it a crime to do business with them. So it's not, or it is partially communism. It's also USA, Uncle Sam, global superpower, #1 world empire coming in and essentially outlawing capitalism in this commie country and helping to destroy it, and then causing a massive refugee crisis and their worst criminal gangs to invade our country and kill our people. Because our government really, at the end of the day, they don't care about us at all. They have their larger agendas. So, you know, in other words, take these two countries, Cuba and Venezuela, drop all sanctions on them. Now, bombard them with global capitalism and see how long they can resist it. Right? And I don't mean bombard them with state edicts. I mean, let corporations offer to trade with them, offer to purchase and improve property in their countries and these things, and watch what happens as they start signing on dotted lines. You know? That's how you destroy communism, man, is just teach them Hayek and show them how prices work. Why did Deng Xiaoping turn against communism? Because communism is stupid and people were dying by the tens of millions. They were eating each other. And he said, you know what, instead of this, we should listen to that Milton Friedman guy and try prices. Who would have thunk it, you know?
Yeah, who would think?
Yeah. So, look, I just think I'm not a utopian. I don't think that if you just do it my way, all peace will break out everywhere in the world or whatever. I recognize that atomic weapons exist and that some nations are much bigger and more powerful than others, and Earth is a mess. It always will be. But, you know, the reason I'm associated with antiwar.com and have made, you know, a pretty great name for a website, pretty specific name for one.
I wonder what it's about.
Right? It's not that we're utopians. It's that we're opposed to American imperialism. And all the wars that we're in now are because America has, you know, established this doctrine of global hegemony over the rest of the planet that necessitates that we always fight and destroy our own nation in trying to do so. So it doesn't mean that if the Russian-British alliance invaded Canada and started threatening us that we should do nothing about that. It just means that that's not what's going on here. America's the evil empire now. That's the problem, is we're the ones. We're not a normal country in a normal time. We're the world unipolar power attempted, going around lording it over everyone else, and then when they defy us, we attack them. So that's a lot different than trying to get along in a normal world. And quite frankly, like, especially with the fall of the Soviet Union and the end of 20th century totalitarianism and the era of total war, you know, represented by the world wars, and then especially brutal counterinsurgencies and all that in the Cold War and all that. The whole world was ready for what they used to call world peace. And it wasn't supposed to be magic. It was just, oh, now we can have world peace now that the Cold War is over. And there's, quite frankly, nothing to fight about. I mean, I don't know if this is, you're too young for this, but the end of the Cold War around here, people thought, oh my God, I wonder if Germany and Japan are going to come back and try to take over the world again. Nobody's going to try to take over the world. That's just us. That's just us. No, Japan and Germany are not coming back. Japan's stock market just got back to where it was in 1988, last week or something like that. Somebody told me. Is that true?
I don't know.
Some ridiculous. They have gone through. They're in no position to lord it over anyone, and neither of the Germans. And I don't think the Germans have the will, the ambition, to be the dominant force on the planet, or certainly in a way that's just belligerent and without regard to their neighbors and to the future of the peace on the continent and all that. The National Socialists are gone. The Communists are gone. I mean, we're dealing with even not necessarily all democracies, but essentially, even when you're talking about whatever, Bin Salman or the Ayatollah or whatever, these people are essentially rational actors who can be dealt with, right? You have to, even you look at Kim, what, he's the son and grandson of some kook. But, like, is he really crazy just because he inherited a dictatorship? I mean, they always talk about him that way, but he doesn't seem to want to die to me. you know? So, and especially when, imagine America, the world empire, giving up the empire, but still having all this reserve power where we're just like really like our heroes in the movies, where we have all this power and we don't use it because it would be wrong to. Why would we do that? And we exchange all that for goodwill, right? Just like after September 11th. What if they had just sent the SEALs and Delta to have a contest for who can catch bin Laden and Zawahiri first? And then they just didn't do anything else at all. There was no terror war and the whole thing was over by Christmas. And they went, oh, that's what these guys get for messing with us, but the whole rest of the world sees how cool we are. And you, I don't know if you're too young for that. The spirit of support for the United States of America, for the American people after September 11th. They held a 1 million man vigil in Tehran to say, we're with you.
Yeah.
Right? And we just took all that goodwill and completely destroyed it. And you know, we have the counterfactual too, right? We have the great Ron Paul, and we have Harry Brown, who ran as the Libertarian in 96 and 2000. And I asked him, well, what would you do? He said, well, I would have, first of all, I told the American people, don't be afraid. It's okay. Yes, some guys did this, but they're all dead. And the people who helped them, we've got them all nice and rounded up. And anybody left out hiding in the White Mountains in Nangarhar province, they're going to surrender or die. But you in your hometown in Wichita Falls, Texas, no, the terrorists are not coming for you. You're just fine. This is the first thing you would have done. Instead of like George Bush did. Yeah, be afraid, be very afraid until I have a chance to attack Iraq a year and a half from now. Son of a bitch. That's the first thing he would have done. He'd have told people the truth about what the threat was. And said, I told you we should get our bases out of Saudi Arabia, and now I'm going to get our bases out of Saudi Arabia. And then the war on terror would have been over. And then he would have spent the rest of his presidency lecturing the people, because, hey, there's not enough freedom in the world. George Bush says we have to spread freedom in the world, Harry. How would Harry Brown spread freedom? He'd have got up there and he'd have given his Statue of Liberty speech every day for 8 years. Hey, you people in the world, you don't respect liberty enough. You ought to do it like us. Only instead of being the world's worst hypocrite, setting little children on fire while he did it, he would have not been killing anyone. He'd have really sincerely meant it. What you need is an independent judiciary. What you need is the right to bear arms. What you need is every scum, no matter who he is, no matter how guilty you know he is, ought to have professional representation at a very fair trial with a jury and things like this, like the way we do it. Make sure our people stay free. Everyone else in the world, you're not good enough. And he could have been a totally imperious prick about it, but only with his attitude, not dropping bombs on people's heads. You know, you look at Iraq, Afghanistan, Somalia, Libya, Syria, all these countries, and all the things about those countries that you could criticize about the people and the way that they do business there. But the worst thing about those countries is America's wars there, right? Like in Somalia, they cut little girls' clitorises off. In Iraqi Kurdistan, too, it's their tradition. It's an East African and Kurdish thing, I guess, more than anything. But the worst thing about Somalia is the USA mass murdering people there since December 2001. That is even worse. America's role in that helpless little country. Same thing for Afghanistan, where they got all kinds of problems. What's the worst thing about Afghanistan? What the USA did to them for 20 years in a row. Killed hundreds of thousands of them, tore their society to shreds. And then we're going to, lecture them about their, male and child rape customs down in the Pashtun South. We dropped cluster bombs on those children. We hired the police chief who was raping them. The governor who was raping them worked for us. So the worst thing about Pashtun culture is nothing compared to America's war there. Nothing. So now we're in the exact opposite of the position to lecture anyone about anything that they need to do to get modernity right, to join the 21st century with the rest of us.
since the most modern society of all is the most barbarian one on the planet and won't stop. How can they take us seriously? How could anyone?
Look, Scott, I think we'll end it there. Is there anything else we haven't gone over? I think we've covered a fair bit, and you're
Sign up for my podcast feed.
sign up for the podcast. No,
I got some books for sale.
yeah, exactly. No, I think we went over a lot. We went over, I guess, how you see America on the global stage,
And check out my interview of him over on
do
Scott
that.
Horton's show.
how many see America, how some like yourself in America see America and see where it's going. And I'm sure there'll be a lot of fire in the comments about what's been said, but mate, I appreciate your work and the provoked and breaking down everything step by step and your knowledge on all these subjects.
Well, man,
I have
can't
no
tell
idea how long this went for.
Yeah, me either. It was longer than yours, but I do talk a lot. But no, I can't tell you how great it's been to have you here. Thank you for coming all the way to Texas to visit me, man. It's really been great.
Mate, no worries at all. How could I come down to Austin and not see you when I was here?
I'm sure glad you did.
Man, thank you very much. Easy. Thank you, Scott.